In the end, it was our hubris that led to our downfall. Not even our immortality was enough to make us infallible. You would do well to heed my warnings and destroy these temples before the next tyrant unlocks their secrets.
A soothing sensation washed over her as she navigated the fungal forest. The path guided her towards her destination. There were no obstacles in her way, only the promise of something so much grander, so much bigger than herself. She could hardly contain her enthusiasm as she drew closer to her destination with each step. She felt it calling out, like it was her invitation to salvation. When it requested to be let in, she didn't hesitate. She let it envelop her senses, let it guide her to wherever it wanted.
They must be stopped.
A faint whisper at the back of her mind slowed her progress. Her head turned in every direction, trying to pinpoint its source. When she couldn't find anything unusual, she almost felt the urge to dismiss it as her mind playing tricks on her. But then the whispers returned, louder this time. They echoed around the environment like powerful gusts of wind.
She cannot be loud. She follows blindly.
She was spinning in circles now, looking every which way as her heart raced with anxiousness. A chill had run up her spine as she felt the presence of something. The music of the forest had dulled ever so slightly and was gradually being replaced by strange metallic whirring. She could still feel its comforting melody calling out to her, begging her to retreat from the encroaching, sinister presence. The sky above her began to darken as the path ahead was slowly consumed by the surrounding foliage. It was as if the forest had come alive, shifting itself to hold her in place. She felt the urge to run, to flee before it could trap her in its little box. But it was too late. The sounds of cracking and snapping filled her ears as tree roots sprang up from underground and wrapped themselves around her ankles. They climbed their way up to her knees, locking them in place. She cried out for help, but no one could hear her desperate pleas. She was at the mercy of whatever now controlled the forest. No matter how much she struggled against the roots, or how much she yanked and pulled at them, they refused to budge. It was only when her struggles had begun to die down did she hear it. The snapping of twigs and the crunching of leaves, the consistent pitter-patter of footsteps gradually approaching her. A shadowy figure moved among the brush, hidden by the darkness that had consumed the forest. In the dim moonlight, she could make out a large animal-like figure. Its shape resembled that of a deer, but it stalked her with the grace of a predator. Bone-chilling snarls and growls assaulted her ears as it crept its way toward her. A massive clawed hand pressed against the dirt in front of her. Her eyes trailed up its arm until she reached its head. It had large antlers atop its skull and rows of jagged teeth lined its snarling maw. Its body was covered in disgusting tendrils, and there even seemed to be small mushrooms growing off of it. A beast that had evolved to this alien environment. This thing. This horror from her worst nightmares. Its very presence bathed her in the most overwhelming sense of dread she had ever felt in her life. Pure, primal terror took hold and locked her in a vice-like grip. Its eyes, the perfect mix of beauty and terror, locked onto her. She felt something assaulting her mind, trying to breach her fortress with all the subtlety of a battering ram.
She can understand.
The voice was louder now, its words echoing in her mind. She gripped onto her head as the presence pounded against her skull. She fought back with all of her might, shielding her mind from its brutal assault.
Do not resist. Listen.
She refused. Everything about this creature was sinister. She needed to get away from it. It kept up its relentless assault on her mind, and she mustered what strength she could to keep it at bay.
You must relent.
Her defenses were crumbling around her. Her resistance was faltering, and cracks formed in her mind for the creature to slip through. It began to sink its claws in, and she cried out in terror as the realization struck that she had lost the fight against it. Then, in her darkest moment, a ray of hope shined through, dispelling the darkness around her. The music that had fallen silent moments ago was returning in full force. It brought light back to the forest and pulled the invasive creature out of her mind. It resisted. God, did it resist. Its claws desperately clung onto her mind, refusing to let go. But the power of the forest dragged it out of her mind with no consideration for the damage it would leave behind. The creature knew it couldn't hold on. Whatever message it sought to deliver would go unheard. It used the last of its strength to whisper a single word that would relentlessly echo in her mind.
Armillaria.
Air rushed into her lungs as Lena awoke from her slumber with a horrified gasp. Her body was drenched in sweat and her heart pounded against her chest. There wasn't a chance for drowsiness, not after the nightmare she had just experienced. She looked in every which direction for any sign of the monster that had violated her mind, but all she saw was the interior of her tent. The mid-morning sun peeked through the barely open flap. She closed her eyes and breathed a sigh of relief that it was just a dream. The relief was short-lived, however, as the word echoed in her mind once more.
Armillaria.
She felt the word escape her lips at the same time, and she couldn't help but ask a terrifying question. Was it really just a dream? That word, that strange word, had followed her outside of her dream and still haunted her thoughts, even in her conscious state. But why? What did it mean? Was it a place? An object? A person? Why, of all the words the creature could have chosen, did it choose to say Armillaria as it was forced out of her head? Her musings were interrupted when Beth pulled open the flap of her tent, allowing the sunlight to assault her eyes.
Rise and shine, princess. Time to pack up your tent and load up on calories before we hit the road.
Lena quickly reached for her Vic and checked the time.
Man, I slept in.
You did. Even the night shift woke up before you.
Lena rubbed at her face, trying to process the fact that she'd slept for so long. Their scheduling was planned around Adamo's 26-hour rotations. Widow and Viking were on night shift for several hours before being relieved by Sam and Arcade, who were the first to retreat to their tents on the previous night. Lena felt a mix of shame and embarrassment for outsleeping the two night patrolmen.
All that walking must have worn me out more than I realized. I'll be out in a second.
Beth gave her a nod before leaving her to pack up her tent. She wiped the sweat off her forehead and sighed. Not a good start for day 2. She reached for her satchel, and her heart skipped a beat when she heard the metallic whirring from her dream. Her hand recoiled away reflexively as she stared at her satchel with a mix of confusion and horror. The sound had played within her mind, but she could feel its source coming from the artifact. It called out to her, its pleas sounding desperate. She set aside her reservations and, in one swift motion, tore the artifact from the satchel before activating its holographic map. She stared at the map for a few moments, trying to process what she was seeing. The original signal was still sitting atop its spot, far to the north, but now a second signal had appeared not far from their current position. It was conveniently located in the same direction the expedition team would be heading. But why? Why did it suddenly appear seemingly overnight? Why was the artifact calling out to her so desperately? Was it related to her dream? Was it a message, a warning, a trap? The more she speculated, the more it terrified her. Though she couldn't deny that it intrigued her as well. This was the kind of thing she lived for, right? Sure, the experience of having that thing pry into her mind the way it did was altogether unpleasant. But at the end of the day, she was still all right. And it obviously was connected to the artifact in some way. She'd be shirking her responsibility if she let fear dictate her actions now. She took a deep breath and let her resolve chase away any lingering doubts. She deactivated the map and stowed it back in her satchel for now. She'd have to bring it up with the others before they departed. She packed up her tent and walked to the center of the clearing where Beth waved her over and held out a food ration for her. She took it with a quick thanks before sitting down and digging in. She absent-mindedly ate while her thoughts weighed heavily with questions as to what her dream could have meant. She failed to notice Beth's scrutinizing glare.
You feeling all right?
Beth's question startled her from her thoughts.
You look a little out of it.
Lena glanced over at her.
I do?
Beth raised an eyebrow.
Yeah, and you're all hunched over.
Lena took note of her posture and realized she was bunching herself up like a turtle inside its shell. She quickly straightened herself out and awkwardly cleared her throat.
I'm fine. It's just something weird happened with the artifact. Something I need to bring up with everyone else.
Her words had caught the attention of Niels and Eckhard, who were both sitting nearby. Beth tilted her head as a hint of concern made its way into her eyes.
Weird in what way?
Weird as in, I had a nightmare where some kind of monster clawed its way into my mind and whispered something to me. It said the word Armillaria right before I woke up, and it's been echoing in my head ever since.
She noticed Niels and Eckhard glance at each other, a mix of confusion and concern dotting their features. Beth scrunched her eyebrows.
What does that mean?
Well, Armillaria is actually a Frun-Sha village not far from here. Eckhard and I plotted our course to go around it today.
Wait, really?
Take a look.
Niels reached for the device sitting between him and Eckhard, sleek and lightweight, roughly the size of a large tablet. Its screen revealed a three-dimensional map, providing a detailed and interactive topographical view of the surrounding terrain. Niels tapped the screen, and the map was holographically projected above the tablet for all to see. He pointed to an icon on the map with an intricate design.
That icon represents our current location, and if you take a look to the north...
He next pointed to an icon representing what appeared to be a small hut.
That is the village of Armillaria.
Lena stared at the icon, a revelation dawning upon her, its location looking a little too familiar.
Wait.
She quickly pulled the artifact out of her satchel and called forth the map. As she expected, the new signal still remained in its place right where the village of Armillaria was supposed to be. This soon caught the eye of everyone in the expedition team, who began to gather around. A few curious murmurs escaped from the small crowd.
Okay, hold on. I'm confused. What does any of this mean?
I don't know. But last night I had a dream that some kind of monster trapped me in the forest and started talking to me. I felt it. Sorry, this is probably going to sound pretty incoherent, but I felt it clawing its way into my mind, and I guess I was fighting it off. I didn't know what it wanted, and it just felt so sinister. By the time I stopped fighting, something else came along, some invisible force, and pulled it out of my head. But it was able to get one word out while it was still attached to my mind.
She pointed to the map.
Armillaria.
Fascinating.
Surlock said, his curiosity clearly piqued.
And I assume the relic began displaying this signal after you were awoken.
Yeah, I noticed it was making like a metallic whirring noise, which, funny enough, I also heard in my dream right before the monster showed up. So, it's safe to assume they're connected in some way.
That's a little odd, though, right? You said it detected the other signal all the way from Etheria, but this one apparently didn't show up until last night, or maybe even this morning.
It could be any number of possibilities. Perhaps the original signal is a beacon designed to be transmitted over such vast distances. Perhaps the new signal is the entity she encountered in her dream, and we've simply stumbled upon its detection radius.
It doesn't really look like it's moving.
Amy pointed out as she gestured toward the static signal.
It also looks like it might cover the entire village.
Lena was confused on what she meant, before realizing that the signal's radius was indeed covering a relatively large area of the forest.
Huh. Yeah, that's a big area to search. But we have the people. We could head out there and try to find out what's going on.
Agreed. This is an unprecedented discovery. We should head to Armillaria post-haste.
Niels quickly held up his hands.
Okay, slow it down, you two. We can't just casually waltz our way into a Frun-Sha village.
We're supposed to be keeping a low profile in case you've forgotten. Some random group strolling in out of the wilderness with a Lockdang and Ausmer in tow doesn't exactly scream discretion.
Do not think I've lost my sense of caution amidst my excitement. I only mean to suggest that this could potentially be a rare opportunity to learn more about the Parlin. But of course, a group as conspicuous as ours could not simply wander into Armillaria without causing a stir. But surely there is no harm in sending a scouting party.
You'd extend our journey and risk getting caught to chase after dreams? Did abandoning your Emperor's psionic network cause you to lose your senses as well?
Surloc's Osmer companion stepped forward indignantly.
Mind your tongue, Eckhard. He was only making a suggestion.
His suggestion could put us all in danger.
That's enough, Eckhard. Surlock is right. We're so blind to the Frun-Sha's motives that we should be taking every opportunity that comes our way to learn more.
He pointed to the map.
It's between us and our initial destination, and it's barely a few hours away. It doesn't cost us anything to pop in and get a look at the place. From a safe distance, of course.
Eckhard released a defeated sigh.
If this goes horribly wrong, at least I'll be able to say I tried.
Lucas ignored him, and instead ordered the group to grab their things and depart from the clearing. Their destination was set, and there was no arguing against Lucas's decision. They spent the next few hours hiking to Armillaria before the scouting party broke off from the main group. Sam led Arcade and Widow through the dense fungal foliage, trying to find an elevated position in the foreign terrain. They settled for a small hillock that offered a clear enough view of the village below. Once at the top, they lay prone and peered through the foliage. Armillaria rested below them, a small village nestled within the forest, its structures appearing to be a blend of natural growth and rudimentary construction. The buildings were covered in moss and fungi, blending seamlessly with the environment. From their vantage point, Armillaria appeared eerily silent. The village was nestled within a natural clearing, surrounded by towering fungal trees that seemed to close in around it, casting long shadows over the small settlement. Widow peered through the scope of her rifle and frowned.
You boys seeing anything? 'Cause it's looking pretty empty right now.
Arcade adjusted his binoculars and studied the fungal huts.
I'm seeing some structural damage on the buildings. A few broken windows. Some of the doors are broken off their hinges.
He focused on one particularly battered building.
Whatever it was recent, and there's no sign of the villagers.
Widow glanced at Sam.
You do realize that's Lucas's cue to send us down there, right?
I'm not thrilled about it, but we've obviously missed the worst of it. Let's head back and tell the others.
Arcade snapped a few photos of the village with his Vic, and after a few more minutes of watching, they pulled back towards the main group. Sam relayed the information to the others, and the discussion was opened up on how to proceed.
So what happened to them?
Nova pondered as he studied the photos.
Did somebody attack them?
Arcade shrugged.
Hard to say. I didn't see any bodies.
It could have been slavers.
On Adamo? Both Libertalia and the Frun-Sha prohibit slavery within their borders.
Speculation will only get us so far. I say we head down there and check the place out.
The place is wrecked to high hell, Lucas. Careful you don't set off a scared villager with an itchy trigger finger.
Your concern is well noted, but none of us are strangers to violent encounters. We'll handle this situation like we would any other, and I want all hands on deck for this. We'll go down there, check the place out, and see if we can't find what's sending that signal.
Lucas's decisive attitude motivated the group into action. Each person checked their gear and mentally prepared themselves for whatever they may discover in the ransacked village. The descent from their vantage point was tense, every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves setting nerves on edge. The village of Armillaria appeared ahead, nestled amidst the dense foliage of the fungal forest. They could see huts that had been built into the hollowed-out remains of giant mushrooms. Lena couldn't shake the feeling of being watched as they approached. The air was heavy with anticipation, and every rustle of the leaves seemed to echo louder in her ears. The village appeared eerily quiet, with no signs of life whatsoever. The buildings stood silent and empty. It felt as if the entire population had vanished into thin air. They stepped onto the paved pathway that rested between the enchanting fungal huts. The architecture was very unique and profoundly beautiful, much like the forest it resided in. But the beauty was overshadowed by the obvious damage to the huts. They had deep gouges in their walls, as if some formidable creature with massive claws had attacked. Many of the doors leading into the huts looked destroyed, as if someone or something had forced its way in. There were broken windows and overturned barrels of food, a mix of mushrooms and dried meat spilling out of them, all evidence of a swift and violent attack. As the group made their way deeper into the village, a sense of unease settled over them, like a thick fog. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of a wooden door swaying in the gentle breeze. They were met with a putrid smell of decay and rot that clawed at their throats and stung their eyes. Amy let out a light cough before covering her nose.
Is everyone else getting chills right about now, or is it just me?
I'm not feeling particularly welcomed at the moment. I'll say that much.
Beth shifted her gaze onto Lena.
You know, I was really crossing my fingers that the whole monster in your dream thing was just like a weird metaphorical kind of thing.
Her eyes traveled over the gash marks on the huts.
Now I'm starting to second guess that a little bit.
Lena nodded.
Yeah, it's pretty creepy, but is it weird that it's kind of piquing my interest too?
Beth stared at her in bewilderment.
I swear you have absolutely zero sense of self-preservation.
Lena responded with a simple shrug. Meanwhile, Lauren was asking the important questions.
So, what's our plan here? Search house to house until we find whatever's sending that signal?
I'm more interested in finding out what wrecked this place.
There is no reason we can't do both,
Surlock said before looking up at Lena.
If we are to assume that our prize is connected to the same subnetwork as the artifact, then it is theoretically possible that you could feel it calling out to you.
Lena tilted her head as Surlock's idea sunk in.
Okay, that's not a bad idea.
She closed her eyes and tried to focus, searching for a sign that something was reaching out for her, but all she could hear was the music of the forest. Even if she could hear the faintest of signals, it would most likely be drowned out by the soothing serenade.
I only hear the song of the forest. The more I focus, the louder it gets.
Intriguing. I have often wondered if the music of the forest could be utilized in such a way that it could mask the presence of other signals. It's quite ingenious, really.
So, if I can't hear where the signal is coming from, how are we supposed to find it?
You must quiet your mind. Find a way to break through the static.
You know I don't have any formal psionic training, right? I'm not just going to be able to do something I've never done before.
No, I suppose not. But perhaps I could teach you. If you'd have my tutelage, of course.
Really? You do that?
Of course. Knowledge is the lifeblood of our existence, flowing from one generation to the next. To withhold it is to sever the veins of our collective wisdom.
That's an eloquent way of putting it. I suppose it would be a waste of a trip if I didn't even try.
Wonderful, though I warn you that it may take some time.
His large eyes looked up at Lucas.
I know we have already delayed our expedition by coming here.
As long as it yields something useful, it's a worthwhile detour.
It would be best if we had some privacy.
Lucas nodded.
All right, we'll leave you to it then. I guess in the meanwhile, the rest of us can search the village, see if we can't find out what happened here.
We should probably set up a few defensive points while we're at it. I don't want to be caught unprepared if whatever attacked this place decides to come back.
Widow nodded in agreement.
There's plenty of vantage points around the area. I could get somewhere up high and keep watch for any prying eyes while the rest of you check the place out.
Good call. Take someone with you while you're at it.
I'll go with her.
Viking volunteered, his voice startling those who had yet to hear him speak on the expedition. Sam acknowledged his words before he and Widow departed to find a vantage point. The group dispersed with a sense of purpose, each member attuning to their role. Mason, Dozer, and Lucas set up a primary base camp not far from Surlock and Lena. It would act as the team's primary fallback point should they need to regroup for any reason. And the remainder of Magnus Company began setting up choke points around the area in the event that someone or something decided to attack them. Lena and Surlock sought a secluded spot for their meditation. They weren't quite as alone as Surlock would have preferred, though. His Ozmer companion insisted on remaining close to him, and Beth did the same with Lena. Luckily, R seemed to be an expert in not distracting from Surlock's meditation, an example that Beth would benefit from following. But Surlock didn't seem to mind her presence. In fact, he invited her to join in their meditation. Beth was naturally hesitant to the idea.
I don't know. It's been a really long time since I've done any sort of psionic meditation, and that wasn't exactly the best time in my life.
I understand, but perhaps joining us would help set those painful memories at ease. If nothing else, it may help relieve Lena Weiss's anxieties.
Beth's eyes drifted to Lena, who looked a bit embarrassed at Surlock calling her out so bluntly. Seeing her friend in need of support, Beth felt a wave of sympathy break through her wall of reservations. She straightened her jaw and nodded her head.
Okay, I'll join you.
Beth felt a warmth run through her, Surlock's way of saying thank you.
Well then, both of you, close your eyes and open your minds to the world around you.
Lena gave Beth an appreciative nod before doing as Surlock requested. Beth hesitantly joined her breath starting shaky but steadying out over time. She hadn't done this in such a long time, but she quickly fell back into the routine as if she had never stopped. As they meditated, the rest of the team dispersed throughout the village, blindly hoping to stumble upon clues that would lead to this mysterious new signal. The unfortunate truth was that they were directionless right now, and the team could only tolerate so many dead ends before they would question what they were even doing here. That wouldn't have been a problem if it was just Lucas. He was a patient man, but he also knew he had a responsibility to the people following him on this expedition. If even a single person got hurt, that burden would lay on his shoulders. That's part of the deal when one chooses to be a leader, to take the blame when things go wrong. He just hoped he was making the right choices, for everyone. On the eastern side of the village, Tix had once again found himself in the company of Stagrel and Icarus. He was surprised by how much he actually welcomed their company. It had been a long time since he'd opened up about his family with anyone. He wasn't really sure why he did it. Maybe he was just itching for a connection of some kind, and Icarus's direct confrontational approach was the perfect way to provoke him. And pragmatically speaking, some level of transparency was crucial for forming alliances within the group. It served nothing to make an enemy of the people around him. That's why he decided to be so patient and earnest with Nova the previous night. Speaking of Nova, he wasn't far behind, which was unsurprising. Nova was hard to pin down due to his insistence on being so enigmatic, but Tix suspected the two of them were very much alike. Nova chose to tell his story around the fire in front of the whole group rather than pulling Tix aside to tell it in private. He was playing the optics game all too well, and Tix was more than happy to play along. Whether or not Nova was being sincere or honest mattered little as long as his audience bought the performance. Loyalty was a fragile thing, and Nova knew just how to garner sympathy from those around him. He was a performer, and the galaxy was his stage. Make no mistake, Tix's analysis wasn't meant to be a condemnation of Nova's character. It was an observation to keep note of, nothing more. A thought to keep in the back of his mind going forward. The group was mostly quiet for the first few minutes as they scoured a few of the huts. Icarus made no attempt to hide his contempt for Nova's presence. Nova seemed unperturbed by his cold demeanor and remained focused on the eerie hut they had found themselves in. The furniture was overturned and belongings were scattered haphazardly across the floor. It was evident that a struggle had taken place, but there were no signs of the villagers who had once called this place home. Nova seemed particularly interested in the family photos decorating the walls. He silently studied them for a few seconds before moving on to another corner of the room, where he seemed to be particularly taken with a small and oddly shaped container. It was only when he reached down and grabbed it did Tix realize it was a case for some type of instrument. He curiously observed Nova as he delicately placed the case on a nearby table and opened it. Tix could have sworn that a holy light must have been radiating out of that case from the way Nova was staring at it, all wide-eyed and slack-jawed. Nova brushed his fingers along the intricate curves and delicate strings of the instrument like it was a long-lost lover. He treated it with an almost religious reverence, which was a bit ironic given their current situation. Nova pulled it from the case as well as some kind of wooden rod. Tix watched as he lifted the instrument and rested it just under his chin. Nova noted the Breg's curious stare.
Ever seen one of these before?
Tix shrugged.
I'm not really familiar with human instruments.
Nova hummed in acknowledgement.
My grandfather was a composer on Earth during the Long 87. The Lock Dang sought to destroy our cultural history, but he studied many of our great historical composers in secret. Tchaikovsky, Rachmaninoff, Stravinsky. The sound of his violin filled the air with magnificent music designed to keep the spirit of humanity alive. His acts of defiance would have been grounds for execution had he been discovered. When the War for Earth began in 2578, he started broadcasting his songs from an old radio station in the countryside. To the local resistance, it became a symbol of hope, a reminder of what they were fighting for. So, of course, the Lockdang raided the building and executed him on air. Then they burned his compositions. Most of his original works were lost forever, but his most famous piece stayed alive, thanks to my father.
Nova began running the wooden rod along the strings of the instrument, creating a hauntingly high-pitched melody. It started off slow and methodical, building to a dramatic crescendo. There was something familiar about it, but Tix couldn't quite place where he'd heard it before. Stagrel, who had been quietly examining a nearby bookshelf, paused and looked towards Nova. Even Icarus, despite his evident disdain for Nova, couldn't help but be drawn in by the music. The tension in the room eased slightly as the notes wove through the air, a temporary reprieve from the harsh reality outside. Nova cut the song off early and lowered the violin, prompting a profound silence to settle over the group. He placed it back into its case with a sad expression.
I swear I've heard that somewhere before.
Nova nodded.
My father's orchestra traveled across free space after the Long 87, playing my grandfather's music to spread the message of hope to all of the thrall races.
He tore his eyes from the violin case and turned towards Stagrel.
The Waryen were the first to adopt the song and play it with their own instruments. Then it was the Olgecs, then the next race, then the next, and the next, until the song was being played across the entire galaxy. Every enemy of the Lockdang united by a collective chorus calling for their demise.
Tix tilted his head in confusion.
Why didn't you become a musician like them?
Nova chuckled bitterly.
I tried to at first, but as I got older, it felt like I wasn't making a real difference. I needed to take action, to have tangible consequences. It wasn't just about humanity anymore. It was about the whole galaxy and what it would look like after the Lockdang Empire fell. I wanted a part in shaping that.
He stopped for a moment to clear his throat.
But those days are long past. Libertalia is my only concern now.
He looked at Stagrel.
Which, as you know, can lead to me making some rather rash accusations.
Rash? You outright accused us of selling out the group for a big payday.
Tix raised an eyebrow at Icarus, remembering his words from the previous day.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it definitely seemed like you were planning to help Stagrel kill Morig.
That's not the same thing.
Nova chuckled slightly.
For what it's worth, killing Morig is a far more preferable alternative. And at the risk of sounding like a hypocrite, I want to offer my assistance.
Icarus's head snapped towards Nova with a guffawed look.
I'm sorry, but do you want to run that by me again?
Nova kept his eyes on the windows while he spoke.
Morig is clearly a threat to all of us. There's no guarantee that this expedition prevents a war with the Frun-Sha, but Lucas is far too emotionally invested to accept the possibility of any alternative. So, if we were to find ourselves in a scenario in which Morig's death was on the table, I'd like to at least have a contingency in place. But only in the event that the expedition doesn't pan out as we hoped.
You've got some nerve, lad. You were so confident making your false accusations just yesterday. And now, after you've made a complete fool of yourself, you want to step up here and offer your assistance like you're doing us some kind of favor. Oh, hello, merry band of conspirators. Could I offer my assistance in killing that lying, cheating bastard that has his sights set on Libertalia? I know that I accused you of selling out the rest of the group for 100 million credits. But let's just ignore that and instead bond over our shared homicidal tendencies.
His eyes shifted to Tix and Stagrel.
I don't know about you boys, but I'm sure as shit not in a forgiving mood.
I'm not asking for forgiveness.
His eyes drifted to Tix.
You said that unity would see us through. So why not come up with a plan that we can all get behind together, rather than worrying about what these two will do behind everyone's back?
But we'd still be going behind Lucas's back. You'd be okay with that?
Nova breathed heavily through his nose, contemplating his next words carefully.
I want to know that Libertalia will be safe, even if I don't return to her. She's been too good to me to be ravaged and violated by Morig's band of marauders. That's not a sentiment Lucas would disagree with, and I'm sure he would be quite pleased to know that I plan on acting as a roadblock between you and Morig, if killing him becomes unnecessary.
So we're not allowed to kill him until you give us permission, is that it?
If you want what's best for Libertalia, then yes. And besides,
he tapped his Vic.
I'm the one with access to our mole, remember? I'm your best chance at getting to him.
Icarus scoffed, but Stogrel was quick to interject.
He is making a strong case, Icarus. Without his help, we may as well abandon the idea altogether.
Icarus grumbled but didn't argue further, crossing his arms with a sullen expression. Tix looked at Nova, still cautious, but sensing the sincerity in his words.
You do realize that I'm not going to be a part of this, right? It's none of my business.
Nova took a step closer to Tix, his gaze steady and unwavering.
The Frun-Sha invading your new home is none of your business? Like it or not, having Morig as an enemy was part of the deal when you came to Libertalia.
Tix opened his mouth to protest, but Stogrel interrupted.
What was that you said? The grunts only survive by sticking together.
He looked at Icarus.
I think the four of us slot very neatly into the grunts category, don't you?
Icarus, still grumbling but clearly more thoughtful, sighed.
Well, I'd pick a few of those other Magnus fellas over the slave catcher and this prick.
He gestured to Nova.
But I'm not petty enough to snub my beak up at help when it's offered, no matter who it's coming from.
His gaze shifted to Tix.
So how about you quit your gawking and just help us out already? Your newest hiding place won't be so safe once Clan Morig comes a-knocking.
Tix shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each of his companions in turn. The weight of their expectations pressed on him. It wasn't all that different to how he formed his alliances on Etheria. As reluctant as he was, maybe he should take the chance to embrace this conspiracy. It's what he seemed to be best at, if prior experience was anything to go by.
All right,
he finally said, despite his inner turmoil.
But for the love of Zerka, play it smart. We're talking about an assassination attempt on a nation's leader, and none of you have exactly proven yourselves capable of doing something so sensitive.
He looked at Nova.
You especially.
Nova shrugged.
Fair enough. It's not like it'll be as straightforward as killing him and walking away. There'll be fallout, chaos, a power vacuum, retaliation from Traxa.
He shook his head.
We're not really in a position to be manipulating the Frun-Sha's power structure from the inside. But the fact that they have a mole at least suggests that someone close enough to Morig doesn't agree with his goals, whatever they may be.
But killing him still won't prevent war. He's a leader to his people. He'll have loyalists.
Even so, taking him out of the picture tips the scales in our favor. Even if it's just a little bit, it'll still be worth it.
Tix released a worried but resigned sigh. This wasn't what he was expecting when he started this expedition. Making more enemies was something he was hoping to avoid when he came to Adamo, but it seemed like he was doomed to find conflict no matter where he went. He looked around at his companions and couldn't help but feel doubt at the idea that the four of them could actually pull something like this off. He'd done some pretty crazy things in his life, but this one felt like a bridge too far. If anything, it gave him another reason to hope this expedition actually managed to pan out, because quite frankly, the alternative was a hell he couldn't quite fathom. Lena sat cross-legged on the cool ground, her eyes closed, trying to block out everything except Surloc's calm, soothing voice. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a testament to the forest's ancient and persistent life. Beth, sitting nearby, glanced occasionally at Lena with concern, while R stood silently, a sentinel keeping watch over their meditation.
Clear your mind,
Surlock instructed, his voice a steady anchor in the swirling storm of Lena's thoughts.
Focus on your breath. Let the world fall away.
Lena inhaled deeply, then slowly exhaled, trying to do as he said. But as she concentrated, the music of the forest seemed to grow louder. It combined with the rustling of leaves, the chirping of distant insects, the gentle creak of ancient trees. All these sounds melded into a symphony that filled her mind, making it impossible to focus on anything else.
Try to find the silence within the noise. Listen beyond the immediate. The psionic signal is subtle, but it's there.
She clenched her fists in frustration, willing herself to focus. She imagined a small, quiet place within her mind, untouched by the cacophony of the forest. But every time she approached it, the music surged, as if the forest itself was alive and intent on drowning out any other sound. The gentle melody became a deafening roar, pressing against her mind, suffocating her concentration.
I can't. It keeps getting louder. I can't hear anything else.
It's not about shutting out the sound. It's about finding the balance within it. The signal is part of this world, just as the music is. You must learn to hear both without letting either overwhelm you.
Lena nodded, though doubt gnawed at her resolve. She closed her eyes tighter, her breath coming in shorter bursts as she tried again. The forest's song swelled, filling her head with its relentless, soothing notes. Each time she thought she'd found a quiet place, the music would crescendo, driving her back, filling every corner of her mind with its presence. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and she could feel her heartbeat pounding in her ears, a counterpoint to the relentless music. Her frustration mounted, her mind a chaotic battlefield where she was losing ground. Beth watched Lena's struggle with a mix of empathy and helplessness. She wanted to offer some form of comfort, but she refused to open her mouth, fearing she would only make it harder for Lena to concentrate. Instead, she tried to lend her support through silent encouragement, her presence a reminder that Lena was not alone.
Don't fight the forest. Embrace it.
Surlocke's voice broke through the storm.
The signal you seek is part of this world's natural rhythm. Trust yourself.
Lena took a shuddering breath and tried to follow his advice. She let the music of the forest wash over her, trying to accept it rather than resist. Slowly, she began to let go of her desperation, allowing the sounds to coexist within her mind. The forest's melody was still overwhelming, but as she stopped fighting, she felt a subtle shift, a faint undercurrent beneath the surface noise. For a moment, she caught a glimpse of something, a thread of thought, a whisper beyond the veil. It was fleeting, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Encouraged, she tried to grasp it, but the effort broke her fragile concentration. The music surged back, louder than ever, completely overwhelming her senses and driving her back into the depths of frustration. Her face flushed beet red as she punched the ground in anger.
No, I almost had it!
Lena gasped, her voice tinged with despair.
I felt something, but I couldn't hold on.
That's progress. You're tuning into the signal. It takes time and patience. Don't be discouraged.
How am I not supposed to be discouraged when it keeps fighting me like this? It's like it doesn't want me to find it.
It cannot hide from that which is persistent enough to keep fighting back. It is a battle of attrition, and the only way it can win is if you surrender.
Lena rubbed the sweat off of her forehead and took a moment to breathe. Exhaustion already weighed heavily on her. She worked to center herself once more, trying to calm her flaring emotions.
Okay, I'm sorry. I got a bit heated there.
Beth placed a comforting hand on her shoulder.
It's okay. It's all part of the process. Trust me. It happens to everyone.
Lena gave her an appreciative nod before closing her eyes once more. At the same time, Surlocke looked up at her curiously.
And what of you, Beth Meyer? Has your meditation revealed anything?
Beth sighed as she shook her head.
I don't hear the music like you guys do. I can feel the psionic energy radiating around us, but it's like it's just one big amorphous blob. Everywhere, in every direction. It's so overwhelming that I can't even discern between you and the mushrooms.
Surlocke hummed at her words.
Intriguing. And without a psionic network to guide you, these feelings are unfortunately directionless.
Beth breathed a chuckle.
Wow, you gave up on me a lot faster than you did with Lena.
Not at all. My own psionic abilities are useless in this particular endeavor, as I am not connected to the proper sub-network. You and I have found ourselves in the same predicament.
Except you still have a psionic network to guide you. Your abilities still have direction. Meanwhile, mine are just chaos.
Surlocke tilted his head.
You speak only a partial truth. Though it may be true that most of us require guidance, the paths we follow must still be carved by those who came before. Most of us are fortunate to find such a path. We are blessed to walk a road that has already been paved. But what are those with no such fortune? Are they doomed? Directionless? Aimless? Lost without a purpose? Is that how you see yourself, Beth Meyer?
Beth opened her mouth, but no words came out. She retreated from Surlock's curious gaze in shame.
Tell me, who are truly the blessed ones? We, who are given a path to follow, or you, who are forced to forge your own path, one that those who come after will be able to follow themselves. Is that not what a leader does? Create a path where there is none.
Beth looked back at the Brakex, not sure how to feel about his assessment of her, especially in front of Lena like this.
You needn't worry about her,
Surlock said, as if he had heard her thoughts, which he probably did.
She won't hear a word from my side of the conversation. I told you I would respect your privacy, but your mind clings so desperately to Etheria that it is difficult to not see what troubles you.
Beth quickly glanced at Lena in a panic, and just as Surlock said, she was completely oblivious, lost in her meditation. She looked back at Surlock, defiance in her eyes. She wouldn't dare speak aloud, but hopefully the angry thoughts rushing through her mind would get the message across.
You keep this to yourself.
Your hostility is misguided, Beth Meyer. I only mean to say that you are too eager to doubt your own actions. You forged a path that others needed to follow, Lena Weiss among them. You needn't allow the burdens of the past to hold you in place. I am sure that she would understand your choices if she knew the truth.
Beth squared her jaw, growing more annoyed with each word Surlock spoke.
Drop it. This is none of your business.
If she discovers the truth on her own, it will only bring unwanted resentment. But you are right. I apologize if I have overstepped.
Beth didn't respond, hoping her glare would say enough. She didn't need to hear this right now, not from Surlock, not from anyone. Amy and Arcade sifted through the western huts, meticulously analyzing every detail. The air was heavy with an eerie stillness, broken only by the sound of their footsteps echoing against the wooden floorboards. As they entered each hut, they were met with scenes of chaos and destruction. Furniture lay overturned, belongings scattered haphazardly across the floor, and the faint scent of something acrid hung in the air. It was clear that a struggle had taken place, but the absence of any sign of the villagers left them with more questions than answers. Their investigation reached an unexpected climax when they stumbled upon a dilapidated building that looked like it had once been a communal hall. The wooden beams were rotting, and the roof had partially caved in. Odd, considering the rest of the village didn't look so old.
Careful,
Arcade warned, pushing the door open with his foot. The hinges creaked loudly, echoing through the empty hall. Amy shined her flashlight around the room, illuminating the dark, dusty interior. They didn't realize what they were looking at right away. There was a strange fungal growth along the walls and floor of the building. It pulsed with a sticky internal glow. As they looked closer, they could see what appeared to be faces carved into the growth. Then realization struck them, and Amy's heart sank into her stomach. It was a collection of bodies, strung up into a grotesque amalgamation of flesh and fungus along the building's interior. Their forms were barely recognizable as human or otherwise anymore. Amy's usually steady hands trembled as she covered her mouth, trying to suppress her horror.
What is this?
Arcade cautiously approached the fungal mass and, perhaps due to morbid curiosity, inspected one of the bodies. His flashlight beam revealed the grotesque details as he drew closer. The figure was barely recognizable, its flesh intertwined with the pulsing, sickly glow of the fungus. He could see where the tendrils had burrowed deep, replacing veins and muscles with their own twisted network.
I think we just found our missing villagers.
Crouching down, Arcade gingerly reached out and touched a particularly large growth on the body's chest. The surface was surprisingly warm, and it pulsed under his fingers, almost as if it had its own heartbeat. He pulled his hand back, wiping it on his pants as a wave of revulsion passed through him. The flashlight's beam moved to the face. He could see the remnants of human features, now distorted, and almost entirely subsumed by the fungal growth. The eyes were clouded over, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was still some semblance of awareness in them. He looked over his shoulder at Amy.
Come take a closer look.
She hesitated a moment before stepping closer.
Turn on that clinical part of your brain and tell me what you see.
Her eyes scanned the body with as much clinical detachment as she could muster.
God, this is...
She trailed off for a moment as she gathered her jumbled thoughts.
It looks like it's taken over their entire system. And look at this.
She pointed to a part of the body where the skin was stretched thin, almost translucent.
You can see how it's integrated into the muscle fibers, the nervous system. It's like it's becoming a part of them.
Arcade's face contorted in disgust. He followed the fungal tendrils running along the floor with his flashlight until he discovered the earth beneath the building had collapsed slightly into some sort of cavern. It was a steep drop, too far for them to simply dive on in. Though, judging by the scratch marks along the floor, he doubted he'd want to go inside. There was clear evidence that something dangerous was lurking in the shadows beneath their feet.
Hello? Who's there?
A soft voice pulsed from behind them. Amy and Arcade jumped out of their skin when they heard it. They shined their flashlights in its direction, but only saw more bodies strung up along the wall. The duo looked at each other before Arcade cautiously stepped forward.
Hello?
I hear your voice.
Another voice said, different from the first, but still coming from the fungal mass of bodies.
I cannot see, but I know you're there.
It was then that both Arcade and Amy saw it. The walls were twitching and wriggling ever so slightly. The faces of the deformed corpses turned in their direction, their shadowy eyes looking down on them. These people were still alive. Amy's flashlight beam wavered as she moved closer to Arcade, her mind racing for an explanation to the horrific scene before her. Arcade stared at the wall of bodies in wide-eyed bewilderment. Strengthening his resolve, he stepped forward.
What happened to you?
I don't remember,
the voice said. The fungal mass quivered violently, and a chorus of voices, fragmented and overlapping, emerged from its depths. The voices, hauntingly familiar yet distorted, began to speak, shifting between different tones and accents with each passing moment.
The Demot banned us from the cave after we discovered the prisoner. But we were curious. We had to know the truth.
The cave was dark, cold. We could hear whispers. The prisoner, he was bound, but his eyes, he could see us. The parts that no one else could see. He warned us, said it would consume us.
The fungal mass quivered, and the voices shifted again, becoming more frantic.
We tried to resist, to obey the Demot, but the whispers followed us home. Those who couldn't resist left to join the chorus.
Mama said to stay close. But then she went away too. The forest took her. It took them all. They went in and never came out.
Amy felt her heart pounding as the voices continued, each one more disjointed and eerie than the last.
Where'd they go? Did anyone see where they went?
We were gathering mushrooms for the feast. The sun was setting and the forest was so beautiful. But then the shadows came. They moved, didn't they?
Yes, the shadows. We thought it was just our minds playing tricks on us, but no. There was something there, something watching us. We could hear the whispers calling out from the deep woods.
The children! They were just here, playing by the fountain. How could they disappear so quickly?
We tried to stay together. Safety in numbers, right? But it didn't matter. The whispers grew louder, and the darkness, it was alive. It pulled us apart, one by one.
The missing ones. They came back, but they were different. Their eyes, empty. They moved like puppets, and they came for us.
We ran to the tavern, barricaded ourselves inside. We thought we could wait it out. But then The doors burst open. Claws, teeth, and those eyes. Those horrible eyes. The trees moved. The ground shifted. We tried to fight, but...
The duo exchanged uneasy glances, their faces pale with fear and uncertainty. The voices from the fungal mass grew more chaotic, blending together in a cacophony of despair and confusion.
They're coming! Hide! Hide!
Where is everyone? Why is it so dark?
Leave us alone!
Please help!
What do you want from us?
Lena felt a shift in the energy around her. The forest's song was still there, but she could now discern a faint echo beneath it, a whisper calling out to her. She focused on that whisper, letting it guide her thoughts.
I think I've found it again.
Surlock's eyes brightened.
Good. Focus on it. Let it draw you in.
The whisper grew stronger, more distinct. Lena could feel its pull, a gentle tug guiding her toward its source. She felt the urge to rush towards it before it disappeared again. But remembering what happened last time, she instead forced herself to be patient. An image began to form in her mind, blurry and unclear. She tried to focus on it, but the more she did, the more she seemed to push it away. So she stopped. She held still and gave it time to come to her. The blur became clearer and clearer until it eventually showed her the entrance to a cave, its interior dark and foreboding. Something in her mind told her to stay away, to come back from the brink of darkness that she had found herself in. But she had come too far to back out now. She walked towards the mouth of the void and let it swallow her whole. She was plunged into darkness, an ocean of black blanketing both herself and her surroundings. But still, she pressed on, guided by the whisper still alive in the abyss she had willingly jumped into. There was no room for doubt now. To follow the whisper through this sea of darkness was an exercise in trust, one that she couldn't afford to fail. After traversing the dark hollow for what felt like ages, she finally came upon something, a light that had broken through the darkness. She cautiously approached, and as she did so, a lone figure materialized in front of her. His skin was pearl white, and his eyes as black as night. He sat dejectedly on the cave floor, his sad eyes staring aimlessly at his feet. Lena looked at him curiously, already feeling a surge of pity. She could guess very quickly that he was a Parlin, one of the so-called Ascended, according to Surlock. He gave off no signals that he was aware of her presence, so she made to approach him and grab his attention.
Hello?
She said softly. He did not respond.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Once again, no response. She took another step closer, and the image of him started to blur.
Wait!
But it was too late. The void around her shattered like glass, and she gasped in shock as she felt herself suddenly regain control over her body. It's a good thing she was sitting down because she was completely disoriented by the experience. Beth grabbed her shoulder, concern painting her features.
Hey, easy. We lost you for a second there. What happened?
Lena grabbed Beth's arm in an effort to ground herself back to reality.
I think I just saw Parlin.
She could already feel Surlock's excitement.
Truly? Did you catch its name?
He couldn't hear me. I kept trying to say something, but it made me lose my concentration again.
She reached out and grabbed a fistful of dirt, feeling her frustration bubbling up again. She growled out in annoyance.
Oh my god, this is ridiculous. I was right there. And now I'm right back at the beginning.
No. You're getting closer with every effort. Don't allow your frustration to discourage you. Use it as motivation instead.
Lena rubbed at her temples, exasperated from the ordeal.
Just give me a minute. I'm starting to feel my sanity slip with every second I waste screwing this up.
Beth gave her an understanding nod.
It's okay. You're not screwing anything up. Just take a second to cool off and try again when you're ready, all right?
She once again wiped the sweat from her forehead as she took a steadying breath.
I know where he is.
A voice, soft and calm, grabbed her attention. She snapped her head over her shoulder and caught a glimpse of something walking away into the forest. A four-legged animal, from the looks of it. She turned back towards Surlock and Beth, who were both staring at her curiously.
What was that?
Beth's face scrunched up slightly.
What was what?
What do you mean, that thing?
She pointed in the direction she had seen the animal.
Did you not see it or hear it?
Beth and Surlock both exchanged looks before Beth shook her head.
No?
She was hit with a flurry of confusion as she looked back over her shoulder.
I swear it was just over there.
She stood up and walked over to where she saw it.
Lena?
Beth's worried voice called out. Lena ignored her and kept walking until she reached her destination. She looked off into the forest and saw nothing.
I know where he is.
Once again, her head snapped in the voice's direction, and once again she saw the animal walking off into the forest. Without saying a word, she began following it.
Lena!
Beth called out once again, but this time she rushed to catch up to her friend.
Hey, slow down! Don't just go wandering off on your own in this place.
The animal stopped for a moment, causing Lena to stop as well. It turned to look at her. There was a chilling familiarity to its features, antlers atop its head, a canine-like maw. But unlike the creature in her dream, this animal was beautiful. Its fur was a white purer than the clouds that roamed the heavens above. Its eyes, a vibrant blue, captured the essence of the midday sky. She was entranced by its stunning glare, wanting nothing more than to reach out and feel its soft fur beneath her fingertips. A tug at her shoulder jolted her out of her momentary trance, and she turned to see Beth, concern painted on her face.
Okay, Lena, seriously, what's going on?
Lena turned back to the direction of the animal, but lost sight of it once again.
It wants me to follow it.
Beth followed Lena's gaze and saw nothing.
What does?
I don't know what it is, but it's trying to show me where he is.
Where who is?
Lena ignored her and tried walking to the animal's last location, but was stopped by Beth.
Hey, stop for a second, okay? Maybe we should tell someone about this before we go wandering off into the forest.
Lena turned her head to see Surlock and R catching up to them. For a moment, it was as if the rational side of her brain had turned on, and she decided that Beth was right. Unfortunately, that notion was quickly pushed back down after she heard the voice again, urgent and demanding.
Quickly!
Lena's head snapped back in the animal's direction.
There's no time. The four of us are enough.
She slipped out of Beth's grasp and followed the animal's trail once again. Beth protested and moved to keep pace with her. Realizing that Lena was being far too resistant right now, Beth pulled up her Vic and called Lucas. High atop one of the larger structures in the village, Widow and Viking kept watch over the settlement. They had a clear view of almost the entire area. From her position, Widow saw Tix, Nova, Stagrel, and Icarus entering a hut to the east. To the west, she observed Arcade and Prophet, meticulously searching one hut after another before entering a larger, more dilapidated building. Lucas, Smoke, and Zilch were constructing makeshift barricades out of furniture from the surrounding huts. These defenses, though not the most elegant, were better than nothing. Nearby, Dozer and Mason were building another barricade, effectively creating a bottleneck for any potential attackers. Near the center of the village was a fenced-off courtyard that would act as a rallying point should the expedition team find themselves under attack. Though the place wasn't exactly built like a fortress, it was a simple wooden fence built on top of a brick half-wall base, but it still covered a fairly sizable area and would prove to give them a defensive advantage should they need one. To the south, Lena, Surlock, Beth, and R were positioned closer to the lookout tower than any of the other groups. Widow had deliberately arranged this, ensuring that any potential threats would be seen long before they reached the group. Still, Widow kept her eyes sharp, making sure absolutely nothing moved without her knowledge. Which is exactly why the group was aware when Lena started walking off into the forest, quickly followed by Beth. Widow didn't hesitate to pull up her Vic and contact Smoke. Sam had just finished constructing one of the barricades when he heard his Vic's radio crackle to life.
Widow here. That girl, Lena, just walked off into the forest.
Well, that was certainly not the kind of news he wanted to hear. He and Lucas shared a glance before he responded.
What? By herself?
Well, the others are trying to keep up with her, but she's in a hurry, wherever she's going.
Sam released a frustrated sigh.
Which way is she heading?
Northeast from the looks of it.
All right, I'll see if I can cut them off.
I'll go with you. Beats sitting around here twiddling my thumbs.
At the same time, Lucas's Vic also crackled to life.
Hey, we're gonna need some help out here. Lena's being pretty insistent that she found something, but she won't wait for anyone before running off to find it.
We know. Widow saw her wander off. Sam and I are heading out there to try and catch her before she gets too far.
Good luck trying to stop her. I've never seen her like this before. We're just trying to keep pace with her right now.
Just keep following her. We'll be there soon.
The two men began briskly walking northeast, and before long, Sam's Vic crackled to life again.
Hey, I know it's a bad time, but Arcade and I just found something that everyone needs to see.
Not right now. We'll be back with you in a few minutes.
Okay, but you should know that we found the villagers.
Are they alive?
Well, that's a bit complicated.
Once again, Sam and Lucas shared a glance.
Look, we're gonna have to deal with one thing at a time here. We'll pick this back up in a few minutes, all right?
Okay, but just so you know, it's pretty horrific. And I think we also found the thing that attacked this place too, or at least where it's living.
Great.
Sam's tone held several layers of annoyance, cursing the poor timing.
All right. Everyone on the ground head to Prophet and Arcade's location. We'll meet up with you when we can. Widow, I want you to keep your eyes on us for as long as we're in your sights.
Watching you like a hawk, boss.
I don't think we should overcommit our forces to the western side of the village. You mind if I hold down base camp with Lar and the Olgex?
Sure, but don't hesitate to rush to the others if they need help.
And with that, the radio went silent. Sam and Lucas pushed forward in the hopes of catching up to Lena before she got too far. It didn't take long for the forest floor to grow damper beneath her feet. Thick layers of green moss began cropping up on mushrooms and rocks alike. Lena felt a slight chill in the air as she trekked closer and closer to her destination. She soon saw the mouth of a cave emerge through the dense foliage, dark and foreboding just as she had seen in her vision. The animal ran inside, urging her to follow. Her feet carried her to the entrance. The first thing she noticed was the repugnant smell of death. She resisted the urge to gag as she rushed to cover her nostrils. It was rancid enough to actually stop her in her tracks and momentarily break her from her trance. Beth caught up to her again and had a similar reaction to the putrid odor.
Jesus!
She exclaimed while covering her nose.
Lena, seriously. Slow it down for a second and wait for the others to get here.
Lena barely acknowledged her words as she turned back to the mouth of the cave, a melodic whisper calling to her from inside the sea of darkness.
He's in there.
Who?
The Parlin. This is where I saw him.
Lucas and Sam caught up to them just as Lena began to move toward the cave entrance. Sam reached out and grabbed her arm, gentle but firm. Lena attempted to shake off his grip, but he was far stronger than Beth.
Let me go. He's in there. I saw him.
Lena,
Lucas said, stepping in front of her to block her path.
We understand this is important, but you need to let us help you. Going in there alone isn't safe.
At this point, Surlock and R had also caught up and were actively blocking her way. Lena took a deep breath, visibly struggling to contain her frustration. She knew they were right, but the urgency of the whisper was hard to ignore. Finally, she nodded.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's just, I don't know. It feels urgent. I'm not sure how to explain it.
Lucas gave her an understanding nod.
It's all right. Just try to keep your head on straight, okay? We can't help you if you won't explain what's going on.
She took a deep breath and nodded.
I saw a vision of this cave. There was a Parlin inside. I think he's trapped in there.
And you want to free him?
Lena awkwardly twiddled her thumbs as she stared at the ground. She could tell from Lucas's reaction that he was disappointed in her, and perhaps even confused as to her motivations for doing something so reckless. So she eked out the best defense she could muster.
I think he's the reason we're here.
Lucas turned in the direction of the cave, scrutinizing the opening. He pulled up his Vic and opened the comms.
Expedition team, be advised. We may have found the signal's source inside a cave. We might lose comms for a few minutes, depending on how deep it goes.
Lucas's words brought a sparkle of hope in Lena's eyes.
Do you need backup?
Lucas's eyes drifted to the 7-foot-tall dragonoid.
We've got an Ozma with us. I think we'll be fine.
R smirked slightly at the comment.
All right, but if you come back without my husband, I'm going to be right upset.
Sam's shoulders twitched as if he suppressed a chuckle.
I promise to keep him in one piece.
And with that, the comms went silent once again. Soon the group assembled at the cave entrance. The interior was slightly illuminated by fluorescent mushrooms, but it wasn't bright enough to navigate without the aid of their flashlights. They all shined their lights into the mouth of the cave, chasing away the waves of the Black Sea. R took point, ready to shield his allies from any potential threats lurking in the darkness. The air was thick with a nauseating stench of decay and mold, a mix so foul it made the stomach churn. The walls and floor were lined with a protruding fungal growth that almost seemed alive. That notion would only prove to be more disturbing when they shined their lights along the walls of the cave to discover a horrifying tapestry of flesh and fungus. Petrified bodies lined the walls, trapped within the infernal darkness. Faces were embedded in the fungal mass, their features distorted beyond recognition. Eyes, once windows to the soul, were now clouded and lifeless, yet they seemed to follow any movement within the cave, giving the unnerving impression of a lingering awareness. Mouths were frozen in silent screams, as if caught in the final moments of unimaginable agony. The group stood in silence, completely overwhelmed by the shock of stumbling upon something so blatantly macabre. Beth's voice cut through the oppressive silence.
What is this?
Lucas shined his light deeper into the cave with a look of determination.
Unfortunately, I think we're about to find out.
He moved to step further into the cavern, but R was quick to step in front of him, reinforcing his role as the group's first line of defense. The cave walls gradually constricted around them as they descended further into its depths. The fungal growth painted the entirety of the cavern from floor to ceiling, evoking the feeling of being swallowed by a massive serpent. R was forced to turn his entire body sideways in order to squeeze through the narrowing space. He looked none too thrilled about pressing up against the gross fungal flesh, but he didn't voice a single complaint. He simply pressed onward. They found even more bodies strung up along these tight corridors, practically forcing them to hug the petrified corpses as they shimmied their way through the tunnel. Lena tried not to look at them, just like she tried not to think about the way the walls squelched as she pressed her hands against them. She failed on both accounts. It was like pushing through layers of wet clay, soft and slimy. Just another thing to add to the list that almost made her gag. What was even worse was the way some of the corpses seemed to stare at them. It was as if they could still see through their lifeless eyes, unable to move in their fungal cocoons. Mason and Dozer poked around what was left of the village to search. They were planning on circling around to eventually reach Arcade and Prophet. Apparently Nova and his little posse had the same idea, seeing as the two groups met up somewhere in the middle. And it was here that the six of them stumbled upon something that completely halted them in their tracks. A massive, pulsating fungal mass protruding grotesquely from what had once been a fountain. The stone basin was cracked and shattered, its elegant carvings now obscured and defiled by the relentless growth of the fungus. The fungal mass sprawled outward, like the twisted roots of an ancient, corrupted tree, its surface slick with a glistening, viscous slime that oozed and dripped into the broken remains of the fountain. Tendrils of the fungus had wrapped themselves around the jagged edges of the basin, creeping up the once beautiful central pillar, now engulfed and almost entirely hidden by the grotesque growth. Its color was a sickeningly vibrant shade of pink, interspersed with patches of dark, moldy black and eerie glowing orange bioluminescence. Its surface was uneven and bulbous, riddled with wart-like protrusions that quivered with each pulsation, as if it were alive and breathing. Thin, thread-like tendrils snaked out from its core, spilling over the edges of the fountain and embedding themselves into the surrounding ground and nearby structures. Clustered across its surface were patches of grotesque, bulbous growths, some of which had burst open to reveal fleshy, spore-filled sacs that released a fine, powdery mist into the air. The stench emanating from the fungal mass was overpowering, a putrid blend of decay and rot that clawed at their throats and stung their eyes. At the heart of the mass, a large, translucent sac pulsed rhythmically, its contents shifting and swirling with a sickening fluidity. Dark shapes writhed within, barely discernible but undeniably alive, moving with a disturbing, serpentine grace. The sac's membrane was thin and veined, stretched taut over whatever monstrous forms lurked within. The entire structure seemed to throb with a malevolent energy, each pulsation sending ripples through the surrounding foliage, making the entire area feel alive with a dark, twisted presence. The closer they got, the more they could feel an oppressive weight bearing down on them, a sense of being watched by unseen eyes that peered from the depths of the fungal mass.
What in God's holy name is this thing?
Mason asked no one in particular, more interested in voicing his befuddlement than getting an actual answer. The group stood frozen, mesmerized and repulsed by the pulsating fungal mass before them. Stogrel tilted his head, his face a mix of confusion and discomfort.
I don't suppose anyone's itching to get closer.
Icarus stared at it with steely determination, his hands reaching for a few incendiaries in his pack.
I'm itching to burn the thing to cinders.
I'd support that plan.
Dozer held up a disarming hand.
I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that's a bad idea. We have no clue what this thing is, so how about we save arson for when it poses an obvious threat?
Mason sneered at the mass with unmistakable disdain.
I don't know, man. That thing looks like an abomination unto nature. I think we'd be doing the world a favor.
Dozer looked at the mass with morbid curiosity. His eyes started scanning the surrounding area until he found what he was looking for. He reached down and grabbed a stick off of the ground before cautiously approaching the mass. No one made a move to stop him, their own curiosities clearly as piqued as Dozer's, although Mason did notice that Nova had taken a few steps back. Dozer used the stick to poke at the fungal mass a couple of times. As it brushed against the slimy surface, the sac at the center trembled slightly, releasing a cloud of fine, powdery spores into the air. It sprayed into their faces, hitting everyone except Nova. They began to cough as the spores irritated their throats. The sensation didn't last long, but it was still enough to make the group retreat from the mass.
Steamin' hell, lad, can I burn the damn thing now?
Jesus Christ,
Mason said through a cough.
Is everyone all right?
Dozer noticeably coughed much harder than the rest of them.
Yeah,
he said through a few wheezes.
Still breathing,
Stogrel said before coughing again.
Barely.
My eyes are stinging, but I'm all right.
You should have stood further back,
Nova said through a chuckle.
Oh yeah, laugh it up, fella. Are you that timid in a firefight too? Gotta push up the rear while everyone else takes the brunt of the damage?
Relax, you look fine to me.
No thanks to this fella.
Icarus pointed at Dozer.
The man was acting like it was something that needed some kind of scientific analysis. But then he just pokes the damn thing with a stick.
Dozer released another wheezing cough.
Yeah, well, I think I've concluded that we should leave this thing alone for now.
Well, shit, Professor. Let's jot down those notes and hand them off to Prophet and Arcade immediately. I'm sure they'll be very impressed with our field work.
Dozer chuckled weakly, grateful to ease the tension from the encounter. With a reluctant consensus forming among them, they decided to carefully retreat from the fungal mass. As they backed away, keeping a wary eye on the pulsating structure, they began to make their way towards Prophet and Arcade, foolishly hoping that whatever they found wasn't nearly as disturbing as the fungal mass. The cave finally opened up again into a larger chamber. There were more bodies littering the area, but these ones were standing upright. A chill ran up Lena's spine as she noticed how the fungal roots sprung up from the ground, locking the corpses in place. She had only experienced the mild version in her dream. These roots didn't stop at the knees. They worked their way throughout the entire body, turning these people into grotesque decorations inside this cavern of horrors. The fungal tendrils snaked across the cave floor, merging and splitting like a river of decay. Lena's heart pounded louder with each step, the echo of her footsteps swallowed by the spongy ground. The smell of rot was overpowering, and she had to once again fight the urge to gag as she moved forward. Her flashlight caught a larger, more ominous structure ahead, a mass of twisted roots and fungal growth, pulsating with a malevolent energy. As she approached, the beam of light revealed something unbelievably horrific. She wouldn't have recognized him if she couldn't feel him caressing the edges of her mind as she approached. It was the Parlin, his body ensnared and almost entirely consumed by the fungus. He was suspended on the wall, his limbs contorted at unnatural angles, fused with the grotesque network of tendrils. Lena's stomach churned at the sight. The Parlin's skin was stretched taut over his skeletal frame, the once pearl-white hue now mottled with dark veins. His eyes, though black and hollow, seemed to flicker with a faint glimmer of consciousness. His mouth was slightly open, as if frozen mid-scream, and Lena could almost hear the echoes of his agony in the silence of the chamber. The Parlin's head slowly turned toward them, his movements constrained by the fungal prison. When he spoke, his voice was strained by the damage to his face.
You.
He stared at her in disbelief.
No. What manner of illusion is this? Have you come to grant me false hope? A new form of depravity?
His head dropped dejectedly.
Just leave me be. I'm in no mood for your games.
Lena stared at him, both confused and intrigued by his words. She shared a look with Lucas, who gestured for her to take the lead. She nodded in understanding and stepped forward.
I don't know who you are, but I'm not an illusion. I could feel your presence from the village, and I followed it here. At least I think I did.
His head snapped back towards her.
You felt my...
He stared at her for a moment, as if some earth-shattering realization had just dawned on him.
You have the astral cage?
Lena tilted her head.
The astral cage? You mean this?
She reached into her satchel and retrieved the artifact, holding it up for him to see. The Parlin stared at it in awe before it bellowed out a raspy chuckle that soon became more manic and uncontrollable. His laughter echoed off the cave walls, filling Lena with a sense of unease. The laughter eventually crumbled into a pained wheezing, and the Parlin at last took a breath.
That's no illusion, which means it's really you in the flesh.
This revelation clearly excited him far more than one would expect from a creature whose body was so overtaken by this strange fungal parasite.
You know who I am?
Of course. I know every corner of this galaxy, every species ever contacted, every language spoken, every war waged, every deal struck. I am all-seeing and all-knowing, and I know the answer to your every question.
Lena stared at him in bewilderment.
Really? Then you have to tell me. What was the creature that spoke to me in my dream? The one that told us to come to Armillaria.
The Parlin opened his mouth, but no words came out for several seconds.
Okay, maybe I don't know the answer to your every question.
He cleared his throat awkwardly.
I'm at a bit of a disadvantage, you see. I've been trapped here for, well, gods know how long. Whatever's been happening in all that time, I'm afraid I've mostly been kept in the dark.
He chuckled slightly.
Quite literally.
Why? I mean, who even are you that you'd warrant this kind of treatment?
The Parlin smiled as if he was anticipating that question.
Why, dear girl, I'm the greatest ambassador to the gods. The Parlin, the Lockdang, the Frun-Sha, and currently, you. I am known by many names. The Machine Whisperer, the Voidwalker. But you may call me Drennick.
Surloc's eyes lit up with recognition.
Drennick? Firstborn of Thesdy?
Lena raised an eyebrow.
Who?
He is one of the first Parlin. He and his siblings were the ones to select who would next be chosen for transcendence. To be called upon by a child of Thesdy was the highest honor among the Lockdang.
Drennick shook his head.
Honor? It was a tool of control. Just look at me.
The fungal tendrils in his body pulsated, as if to emphasize his point.
Is this the honor the Brakex envisioned?
Lena stepped closer, her curiosity overcoming her initial revulsion at the sight of Drennick's fungal prison.
What happened to you?
The Parlin's mood instantly turned sour.
My dearest little sister. To call her a jealous, sadistic harpy would be an understatement. She's the one who put me in this prison. The sight of my suffering no doubt brings her great joy.
Zalma did this to you?
Surlock asked, unintentionally sharing his intense feelings of surprise with everyone in the area.
Why?
Petty cruelty would have been enough for her. But like with all things involving my sister, control is her great motivator. My siblings and I have always had a tumultuous relationship, to say the least. As I'm sure you can imagine, constantly competing for Emperor Orin's favor can result in some rather bitter rivalries. Plotting, backstabbing, the usual fare. We even killed each other on more than a few occasions.
Lucas tilted his head in confusion.
What do you mean you killed each other?
Death is little more than an inconvenience for the Parlin. When we die, our minds are transferred via the psionic network to a new body here on Adamo. It's why a prison like this one is necessary to keep us contained.
He speaks true. To become a Parlin was a promise of immortality.
Yes, the perfect way to motivate your people to fall in lockstep with the will of the gods. Promise them eternal life But don't tell them about the infernal prison that awaits them should they fall out of line.
So, wait, when the Parlin die, they just resurrect in a new body?
It's true. It's one of the many purposes of the Communion Temples. Galaxy-spanning psionic beacons that our minds can return to upon death. The temples then build us a new physical host to inhabit, and it proceeds to transfer our minds inside.
So, are there more Parlin on Adamo?
Well, there were only 3 until you brought the rest here.
He gestured towards the artifact. Lena could only scrunch up her eyebrows in confusion at his answer.
What do you mean?
Oh, so you don't even know what it is then? It seems the winds of fate have kicked up a strange vortex of coincidence. That bauble, the astral cage, is a device designed to capture the minds of Parlin upon death. I created it myself.
So it's like a prison?
Indeed. What Parlin would willingly surrender when the threat of death is meaningless? Why waste precious resources building a prison that can contain their psionic powers when you can simply kill them and trap their minds?
Lena's hands began to tremble as the weight of Drennick's words sank in. All the dead Parlin she had seen in that room. The realization that their minds were trapped inside the astral cage filled her with a sense of dread and responsibility. She glanced at Lucas, who seemed equally troubled by the turn of events.
Why does Morig want it then?
The answer to that question is more multi-layered than you may think. You see, Morig seeks the same immortality shared by the Parlin. In order to achieve that goal, he needs to complete the pilgrimage required by all Parlin. But in order to even start the pilgrimage, he needs a cipher that is broken up into 3 pieces. I hold one, Zalma holds the second, and my brother Mirmil holds the third.
I would assume that you wouldn't give up your piece of the cipher willingly.
Drennick nodded.
How astute. Zalma thought that the Vorlith might be able to extract the cipher from my mind, but she severely overestimated the creature's abilities. And it appears feasting on the villagers' minds didn't strengthen it enough to breach my defenses.
Sorry to interrupt, but could you pause on that for a second and explain what the hell a Vorlith is?
He gestured toward the fungal roots embedded within his destroyed body.
This is the Vorlith, very rare and exceptionally dangerous. It ensnares the minds of its victims and feeds on their thoughts, memories, consciousness, increasing its own intelligence in the process. It traps its prey in a web of tendrils, draining their essence until only a hollow, mindless shell remains. The leftover biomass of the deceased are then transformed into mycomorphs, an unholy amalgamation of reanimated corpses and other dead tissue reshaped into horrific new forms by a recombinant infection derived from the Vorlith. The resulting creatures are extremely aggressive and will attack any living organism on sight. Their sole purpose is to acquire more corpses to convert and spread the infection.
The group stared back at the corridor they had come from in horror.
The villagers. All the bodies we saw on the way in.
Drennick nodded, as if understanding his line of thinking.
Yes, the Vorlith's most recent victims, I'm afraid. I remember when they first came to me. I warned them to stay away, but they had no reason to trust me. Zalma controls this Vorlith, you see, and she's been in league with the Frun-Sha for a long time. They believed they were under her protection, but when they entered the cave, they breathed in its spores. It gave them hallucinations and tricked them into coming back here.
It tricked them into coming back?
Oh yes. The Vorlith would prefer to take its victims alive, as you can't consume the intelligence of a corpse. The spores are quite multifaceted, as they are capable of enthralling the minds of sentient creatures such as yourself, convincing them to embrace the Vorlith willingly. But those tend to be the rare exceptions. For most, the spores will cause coughing fits or fatigue, ensuring that the mycomorphs will be able to capture you with minimum resistance.
Oh well, that's lovely. Have we been breathing in spores this whole time?
You would have noticed if you encountered any. They're sprayed out of small fungal pods and don't survive in the open air for very long. If you've made it this far without encountering a hostile mycomorph, then you're probably in the clear.
The fact that you felt the need to say probably very much concerns me.
Good. That concern will keep you alert, especially since you've taken to stepping foot in Frun-Sha territory. Between Morig, my siblings, and the Vorlith, you have no shortage of enemies.
He stared at Lena intently.
Tell me, what are you planning to do with that bauble?
Lena's eyes darted to the artifact in her hand.
We're following a signal leading us to the north. Morig's putting soldiers on our borders and threatening to go to war with us over the communion temples. We just want to prevent any unnecessary bloodshed.
So, you don't know what the signal is either? You don't even know what you're chasing after?
Lena wobbled back and forth awkwardly.
No.
Drennick actually chuckled at her response.
You're certainly an amusing bunch, I'll give you that. Very well. Allow me to paint a picture for you. You see, there's one communion temple for every Parlin that exists. Now, what are the communion temples? I hear you ask. Why, the power of the gods made manifest in the grasp of mortals. Weapons of mass destruction, limitless energy, teleportation, weather manipulation, bioengineering, ecological control. The temples will give you access to all and more. So why is there one for every Parlin? Because each individual Parlin's mind is branded with a psionic cipher that allows them to control one temple. And just like that, a delicate power balance is born. No Parlin holds more power than the other. If one steps out of line, the rest have the ability to correct them. So, if a certain Lokdang Emperor wanted to, say, consolidate that power all for himself, how would he go about doing such a thing? Well, first he would confide in his most trusted ally, that being me, and ask that ally to construct him a means of capturing another Parlin's cipher. So I began studying how the temples worked, and found a way to reverse engineer the psionic mind transfer. I constructed the astral cage but still had to overcome another hurdle. The temples wouldn't accept input from the device, not without some tampering at least. And thus I created a control nexus, connected it to every communion temple on the planet, and designed it to receive the astral cage's input. But of course the control nexus had to be constructed in secret, away from the prying eyes of my fellow Parlin. So I embedded a map to the device inside the very key needed to activate it.
Lena's eyes lit up in realization.
So we were right to some extent. The artifact is the key to controlling the temples.
And that's exactly what Zalma wants. Are all the pieces finally falling into place? Zalma wants to control the temples. Morig wants immortality. Murmil is a spineless weasel that'll do whatever Morig tells him to. And as for Traxa, well, he simply wants safety and prosperity for his people.
And Chairman Holt promised Traxa that he would be given the Emperor in chains. He seeks to trap Orin's mind within the astral cage as well.
We're having all kinds of revelations today, I see.
But wait, if Zalma is a Parlin, doesn't she already have control over her own temple?
That's the cruelest irony of it all. She doesn't. None of my siblings do. We were a special case, given that we were all human before the transformation.
You were?
Oh, absolutely. My mother was something of a Lokdang loyalist. She put the Empire before her very own species. Orin was so impressed by her loyalty that he offered her the chance to become Parlin. Of course she turned down the offer and asked him to instead give the honor to her children, to which Orin agreed. And that's how I'm here before you today.
Your mother sacrificed her chance at becoming a Parlin for you and your siblings?
Drennick nodded.
Yes, my mother's loyalty to her children was absolute. She believed that the Lokdang would ensure our future prosperity. But she underestimated the destructive potential of the power she entrusted us with.
And now Zalma wants to use that power for herself.
Lucas added with a frown.
Indeed. She's driven by a desire to wield absolute control over the communion temples. Morig's involvement complicates matters further. His ambition for immortality makes him a dangerous pawn in Zalma's game.
Lena glanced at the astral cage in her hand, its surface glinting with an otherworldly light.
So what do we do now?
Drennick's eyes bore into hers.
That's the question of the hour, isn't it? You claim to want to avoid bloodshed. But do you really believe that's possible now that you understand the full scope of power you've brought to this place? Under normal circumstances, I would suggest hiding it somewhere that no one can find it, but... well, we saw how that worked out. But the option's on the table if it strikes your fancy.
Lucas shook his head.
Hiding it away won't stop Morig from invading our home when Traxa returns. We need a solution that avoids war altogether.
That's awfully hopeful of you. I'm sorry to say it, but you're not getting untangled from this mess unless you kill Zalma and trap her in the astral cage. And if you do that, then Morig will be none too pleased, so you'll have to kill him as well. Which will undoubtedly anger Traxa, since the two are good friends. You may not want to hear it, but conflict, war, bloodshed, it's the only path forward.
Lena frowned, her grip tightening around the astral cage.
There has to be another way. Killing them can't be the only answer.
Drennick sighed with a weary look in his eyes.
Idealism is a luxury few can afford in times like these.
Lucas stared at the artifact in Lena's hands, mulling something over in his mind.
What if we took control of the temples instead?
Absolutely not. These temples are far too powerful to be left in the hands of anyone, let alone you. I hid the astral cage away to buy myself time to find a way to destroy the temples. But Zalma got to me first.
Lena's eyes widened at the realization.
You were the one who hid it away.
Yes. I hunted my fellow Parlan down to the last, harvesting their minds as they died. All except Orin and my siblings. Zalma was already in league with the Frun-Sha at the time, and I had no allies I could call on. Not that I would have trusted anyone with the astral cage regardless. So I hid it away with the final bodies of those I had slain, mere weeks before the humans took full control of the planet. I staved off Zalma for nearly a decade before she finally caught up with me. She locked me up with the Vorlith and used it to probe into my mind. That's how they discovered both the location of the astral cage and the key to the facility it was locked up in. But believe me, I made it work for every crumb of information.
Lena was taken aback by his recounting of events.
It was you. It was all you. Every step of the way. Every mystery tied to this thing. The buyer, the key, the damage in the facility, the corpses, the gateway chamber, the connection to the Frun-Sha. It all wraps back around to you.
Drennick's expression softened slightly.
Yes, well, this is the price I pay for my mistakes, I suppose.
You said you were searching for a way to destroy the temples. If we somehow managed to free you, do you think you could still find a way?
Ah, I see we've finally reached our vertex. As a matter of fact, you can free me. You see, if we were really desperate, then all you would need to do is kill me, and my mind would return to the temple of the Lupath. But of course, since that just so happens to be the heart of Frun-Sha territory, we should probably avoid doing such a thing. Lucky for us, we have a second option. The astral cage.
Lena stared at him incredulously.
You want to trap your mind inside this thing? Wouldn't that give Morag easy access to your piece of the cipher if he got his hands on it?
Drennick gave a bitter smile.
The irony isn't lost on me, but I'll still be able to communicate with you once my mind is inside, provided you command the astral cage to allow me to speak once I'm in there. You do know you can do that, right?
Lena tilted her head.
No. So, I could have been able to talk to the other Parlan this whole time if I just asked?
It follows your commands, does it not?
Yeah, I guess it does. I just never really thought to try anything that wasn't related to the map. You didn't exactly leave an instruction manual.
Drennick released a dejected sigh as he stared up at the ceiling.
Gods preserve me if this is the salvation you've sent.
He looked back at Lena.
I guess you'll need a crash course on how to capture my mind as well. Just transfer your psionic energy into the astral cage and command it to mind trap me.
Lena looked at the artifact in her hand, its weight now heavier than ever with knowledge of its true purpose and potential.
Are you sure this is what you want?
She looked back up, and her eyes met his. There was an unexpected look of desperation on his face.
It tortures me, little sister. Every day it finds ways to break down my resolve so it can extract my piece of the cipher. Every day I have to fight it off, and with each new mind it consumes, its creativity only grows. Every single day. I stopped living a long time ago.
She wasn't expecting that response, but it did manage to tug on her heart. Her resolve hardened as she saw the raw pain in Drennick's eyes.
Okay.
Lena lifted up the artifact and did as he said. She focused on Drennick and commanded it to target his mind. Soon, a subtle yet perceptible shift began to occur in the atmosphere around him. The air seemed to hum with a low, resonant vibration, almost like the distant strumming of a deep chord. A faint, shimmering light enveloped Drennick, starting as a soft, silvery glow at the edges of his form. The glow intensified, swirling and pulsing in rhythmic patterns that mirrored the beating of a heart. Within the glow, tendrils of energy danced and twisted, like streams of liquid mercury, weaving a delicate lattice around him. The aura took on an ethereal quality, with hues of indigo, violet, and silver, merging and separating in a mesmerizing display. It cast a soft, otherworldly illumination across the cavern, highlighting the contours of Drennick's fungal prison and creating shadows that flickered and shifted like living entities. As the energy around him grew denser, the air was filled with a faint melodic whisper, as if countless voices were murmuring secrets just beyond the threshold of hearing. The tendrils of light began to converge, focusing on Drennick's head, and his eyes glowed with an intense inner light.
Good. Now for the really unpleasant part. One of you will have to kill me.
What?
It's part of the process. The astral cage can't rip a mind from a body. It plucks it from the psionic network after death. So one of you has to step forward and get a little blood on your hands.
Lena heard the heavy footsteps of R approach from behind her.
Allow me to do it.
Wow. Nice to see you have no qualms about shooting a guy you just met in the face because he asked you to.
There is strength in his conviction. It will be an honor to free him of his torment, one way or another.
You realize that's a very off-putting response, right?
Quickly now. The mind trap won't last forever.
Very well,
R calmly said as he raised his weapon at Drennick's skull. Lena turned away, covering her ears.
I can't watch this.
The gunshot echoed throughout the cavern. Lena stole a glance in Drennick's direction to see his body slumped back and motionless within the fungal tendrils. The astral cage began to make its mechanical whirring once again as it lit up in her hand. The whirring slowly transitioned into a higher pitch for several seconds before flashing one last time, and then it was silent. The lights had died down, and it once again turned into the same unassuming metal ball she had found several days ago. Lucas stared at it in anticipation.
Did it work?
Lena transferred her psionic energy into it and commanded it to let her speak to Drennick. Just like with the map, the outer plates of the sphere began to shift, creating an opening on top. For a moment, she thought she had done something wrong, but then a voice reverberated from the artifact, dispelling the notion.
It worked,
the voice said, lighting up the artifact as it spoke. Lena gently grasped onto the astral cage, as if she was holding a small animal.
How do you feel?
Much lighter than before. It's been a while since I've left a body behind. Would it be too ironic to say it feels liberating?
Lena lightly chuckled at his candid attitude.
Not at all. That's actually really good to hear.
Yes, well, we'd better be off then, before the Vorlith discovers what you've done.
The realization slowly sunk in that they were still standing within the lair of a creature that feeds off of people's minds.
Yeah, good call.
The group turned back in the direction they came from and began working their way through the narrow corridors. There was an alarming feeling in the air that Lena couldn't shake. She still never got the answer as to what she had seen in her dream or what had led her to the cave. It wasn't Drennick calling out to her, so what was it? The question would have to remain unanswered for now, but Lena knew she should be counting her blessings. The very fact that they stumbled onto Drennick was something of a godsend for their expedition. To think that they found an actual Parlin in this place, and not only that, but the same Parlin that just so happened to create the artifact she had found in that Lockdeng facility on Etheria. It was as if all the answers to their questions had fallen straight into their laps. One would forgive her for feeling as if it wasn't just pure coincidence. Something had guided her to Armillaria and to Drennick. For what purpose she didn't know, but she hoped that whatever force it was benevolent. Her hope brought her little comfort, however, as they drew closer to the cave entrance. There was an eerie chill in the air and a strange feeling that something was off. But what was it? It was then that she noticed one of the fungal cocoons on the wall, but there was no body. Was it like that when they came in? Now that she was thinking about it, she hadn't seen a single body on their way back. Very odd, considering the walls were littered with corpses on the way in. Drennick had told her that these things would come back as mycomorphs, creatures eager to hunt down prey for the Vorlith. Is that why they're gone? Did they crawl out of their fungal cradles while the group was talking to Drennick? No, she was just being paranoid. She'd simply not noticed the bodies on the way back, because her mind was too occupied with the revelation that came with discovering Drennick. Everything was going to be fine, right? Before long, the group had found themselves back at the entrance of the cave. The early afternoon sun served as their beacon in the darkness. Drennick's voice echoed from the artifact as they moved towards the exit.
Well, at the risk of tempting fate, I have to say that went rather smoothly.
As if on cue, R suddenly stopped, bringing the group to an abrupt halt.
Aracanthus?
Surlock said, his shared emotions betraying his sudden sense of worry.
Is everything all right?
R simply stared ahead, his shoulder-mounted light illuminating the cave walls. Lena's eyes scanned the area, trying to piece together what was wrong.
The bodies are gone.
Her heart dropped into her stomach. The fungus-covered walls were devoid of any of the corpses they had seen when they first entered. What was once a sea of mangled limbs and frozen faces was now a wall of empty cocoons. Beth's face turned pale as she stared in wide-eyed horror. Lena doubted that she looked much better, judging by how cold she felt all of a sudden.
Someone's breathed in the spores.
Suddenly, they could hear popping sounds in the distance, one after another. They became more sporadic with each passing second. It didn't take a genius to realize they were gunshots. Sam's head immediately snapped to the cave's entrance. Without saying a word, he sprinted outside and made a mad dash toward the village. The others lagged a few seconds behind, but their destination remained the same. They all understood what was happening. The village was under siege once again, only this time they were playing the role of the villagers. Tix could hardly believe his eyes. The mass of bodies strung up along the wall made his skin crawl. The fact that they were still alive only added to the horror. The voices were muddled and confused, unable to comprehend the severity of their current predicament. Prophet and Arcade were already growing desensitized by the display. Their current focus was on the hole leading underground.
You want my guess? Whatever attacked the village is using this place as a sort of den.
Mason kept his distance from the hole, having learned his lesson from the fungal mass.
You think it's in there right now?
Arcade shrugged.
No clue, but I'm not eager to find out.
Nova nudged Dozer's shoulder.
I bet the big man would love to go in and find out. He can poke it with a stick and report back his findings.
Dozer gave him a disapproving look before eyeing the bodies strung up around the room.
I don't think now's an appropriate time for jokes, Vic. What happened to these people is beyond horrific.
Prophet nodded.
Yeah, which is why I think we should level the whole building, bury this thing's den, and put all these people out of their misery.
Mason felt the weight of Prophet's suggestion wash over him.
Damn. Might be a little extreme, don't you think?
Take one good look at all these people strung up and tell me it's not the right call.
Mason's eyes scanned the mass of bodies, making the mistake of imagining the torment of being in their position. He shuddered at the thought of losing control of both body and mind, slowly degrading to the point of not even understanding the horror of what had happened to him.
I guess it would be the most humane thing to do, wouldn't it?
But do we even have the ordnance to level this place?
Several eyes shifted to Icarus, knowing full well that he was the one to answer such a question.
Oh, so everyone finally needs to turn to old Icarus for this task, eh?
Can we do it or not?
All right, calm down there, Miss Proud and Superior. I don't think we've got enough plastic explosives to topple the whole building, but we can put a pretty big dent in it.
He reached into his pack and pulled out a metal cylinder with a notable orange glow.
And if needs be, I got enough fire starters to burn the place down.
Prophet held up her hands, clearly perturbed by the suggestion.
We're not burning these people alive, Icarus. We're trying to ease their suffering.
Yeah, but what if the explosion doesn't kill them?
A heavy silence fell upon the group as the question sunk in. Icarus's idea had suddenly sprouted legs to stand on.
If we're really that concerned, we could go around the room and systematically kill them one at a time.
Jesus fuck.
Mason said with a heavy sigh.
What did we get ourselves into?
A shit situation with no easy choices. I agree with Vic, though. I think my conscience would rest easier knowing we took care of them before leveling the building.
Not to be the cynical one, but time isn't really on our side, and any actions we take here are likely to alert the Frun-Sha to our presence. Be it gunshots from executing these people, an explosion demolishing the building, or smoke from a fire.
We're not leaving them like this.
Please don't hurt us.
A voice squeaked from the mass of bodies, stealing everyone's attention.
Yes. We are happy.
We exist together now.
The hairs on the back of Mason's neck stood up. A moment ago, they were acting as if they didn't understand where they were, only grappling onto faded memories. But now...
Wouldn't you like to join us, Mason?
And that was the straw that broke the camel's back. He was already uncomfortable. One might even say horrified by the current situation. And now one of the voices had just addressed him by name, when that's information they shouldn't have access to.
What in the actual...
Yes, Mason Liu. Another voice. A new perspective.
Such enthusiasm of weaponry, of the things he could teach us.
But he is not the only one. Sizwe Gamade wields such strength, though he is dying faster than the others.
Dozer shifted uncomfortably, not liking where this was going.
If he were to join us, we could save him. Death has no hold in our chorus.
Indeed. And Corvo Zeal? He's quite the eccentric one. So ambitious for grandeur.
Icarus narrowed his eyes, tightening his grip on the incendiary grenade in his hand.
Yes, though his soul is so very full of pain, he seeks a transformation, one we could give him.
Tixbor, does he even know who he is anymore? What would his wife think of him?
Tix winced at the mention of Uvira.
He'll never know. He has no place anymore, no purpose or direction, but we could provide him one.
And what of Stargirl Boskren?
Stargirl gripped onto the weapon in his holster and eyed the mass of bodies carefully.
Oh, the wickedness in his heart. If only the others knew. Perhaps we could coax the truth from him.
Everyone jumped as the gunshot rang in their ears. The barrel of Stargirl's weapon was still smoking. His target had slumped back against the wall of fungus, a putrid hole in its tendril-ridden skull. One of the voices chuckled.
I don't think he likes us talking about him.
Tix's shock was pulled away from the voices and towards the Waryen.
Stargirl.
Stargirl ignored him and holstered his weapon.
You know, I think I've changed my mind. I believe I would revel in destroying this place.
It's too late. They're on their way now.
Yes. Soon, you will merge your voices with ours, and you will join our eternal chorus.
Prophet stared at the bodies dumbfoundedly.
What do you mean they're on their way? Who are you talking about?
The silence she received in return was deafening. A bad omen if there ever was one. Soon their Vix crackled to life and Widow's voice broke through the quiet atmosphere.
Heads up, everyone. I'm seeing some movement from the northeast, and it doesn't look like any of our people that went out that way.
A shared look of worry made its way around the group. Prophet was the first to reply.
Have you tried hailing any of them?
We did. They're not responding.
Prophet took a steadying breath.
Okay, so the villagers just gave us a cryptic warning about something heading towards the village. I'm gonna assume it's not friendly.
Oh, that's comforting. It's heading this way, so, feel free to wrap up whatever you're doing over there.
Prophet released an annoyed sigh, cursing the bad timing.
Yeah, all right. We'll be over there as soon as we can.
She lowered her Vic and turned to address the others.
Well, that felt like a slap in the face.
So what are we doing then?
Prophet eyed the House of Horrors for a few moments.
I think we should set some charges before we leave. That way the place is at least ready to blow if we need it to.
It's about damn time!
Icarus exclaimed as he pulled an explosive charge out of his pack. Unfortunately for Icarus, he wouldn't get the chance to plant the explosives, for it was in that moment that the chorus of voices spoke up for the final time.
There is no need for doubt or fear anymore. To join us is to be free from such petty things. You will become so much more.
The bone-chilling sounds of scratches began to emanate from the hole in the floor. The cracking and snapping of roots filled the dark space below, followed by shambling and shuffling. The disheveled remains of the villagers began reacting to it, their mental faculties seeming to deteriorate in an instant. Their words had been replaced by a low, guttural moan, deep and resonant, reverberating across the walls and making the floor beneath them tremble. The moan rose in pitch and intensity, merging into a chorus of wails that sounded almost human, but twisted and distorted beyond recognition. It was a sound of pure agony and despair, layered with an eerie, otherworldly resonance. Each wail was punctuated by sharp, rasping breaths, as if each of them were struggling to draw in air through decayed, constricted throats. There was a wet, sloshing undertone, the sound of fluid moving through rotted flesh, and an unsettling clicking noise, like the chattering of teeth or the snapping of brittle bones. Prophet's eyes widened in horror as the roots began to loosen, slowly releasing the bodies from their grotesque cocoons. The twisted forms fell to the ground, an unnatural tangle of too many limbs and mismatched parts, each horrifyingly functional despite their nightmarish arrangement. Their elongated appendages ended in sharpened claws or jagged bone-like blades, ready to tear and shred. Some of the creatures had fused together, moving in tandem as if forming a single monstrous organism. Prophet didn't have but a second before one of them looked up at her, its cloudy dead eyes still somehow filled with malicious intent. It released a guttural growl as its elongated limbs snaked underneath its twitching body to lift itself up off the floor. In one fluid motion, it was on its feet and charging at her, every muscle in its body seemingly spasming at the effort. Horrifically grotesque pustules began popping across its body, releasing a putrid black liquid that drizzled down its form and onto the floor. Prophet could have sworn that her heart had stopped. If someone had told her that she actually died of fear in that moment, she would have believed them. It would have been a mercy compared to letting this thing tear her apart with its lacerating limbs. But alas, it was not meant to be, as she was simply too paralyzed to even react. The deafening roar of gunfire tore through the air, and the creature's legs exploded beneath it. It fell to the floor with a sickeningly wet crunch. Prophet looked over her shoulder to find that Arcade had been her savior.
Run!
He yelled as he took aim once more. Prophet turned back towards the creature, only to realize it was still pursuing her. It was utilizing its elongated arms to crawl along the floor towards her. Arcade fired several more shots, destroying its limbs and head in the process. Prophet finally found her feet and bolted towards the exit at a speed that would put the most advanced hyperdrives to shame. Tix and Nova ushered her out as Stagrull was already outside. Arcade, Mason, Dozer, and Icarus followed closely behind her, all of them scrambling to get away from the creatures as more and more fell from their suspended cocoons on the walls. The whole ordeal went down in a matter of seconds. The reaction of the group was swift enough to get them out of the building, but the creatures refused to halt their pursuit. A loud, thunderous roar originating from the other side of the village echoed across all of Armillaria like a war horn calling fighters to battle. The creatures inside the building were rushing for the exit. There were so many that they clogged the doorway trying to get through. The group held their ground for a few seconds, naively hoping that funneling the creatures through the front door would provide them the advantage, but some of them began tearing away at the walls and smashing through the windows to reach their targets. It was unlike anything they had seen before. The creatures flowed from the building like raging rapids, their eagerness to kill unmistakable. They forced the group to begin falling back, as their sheer numbers alone made them a formidable foe. To everyone's surprise, the creatures began employing a pincer formation to surround them. It happened so fast, they didn't have time to react. The creatures were on them, slashing and stabbing from all directions. Mason tripped over himself when one of the creatures made it within striking distance. He fell onto the ground, just barely dodging its deadly claws. He scrambled for his weapon, barely having enough time to shoot off one of its arms and blow a massive chunk off its torso. For a moment, he couldn't help but feel relieved at how fragile these things seemed to be, but that thought was immediately put to rest when the creature continued its pursuit, opting to attack with its one remaining arm. This time, Mason didn't hold back. He switched his weapon's firing mode to automatic and pulled the trigger, tearing the creature to pieces, as well as several others that had managed to close the distance while he was stuck on the ground. He'll say it until the day he dies. Ballistics beat plasma. His ruminations were interrupted when Nova pulled him off the ground and led him to a nearby hut. They ran inside and barricaded the door with whatever they could find while the creatures caught up to them and began tearing away at their meager defenses. At the same time, Tix, Icarus, and Stagrull were forced to retreat along the pathway, desperately seeking safety from the creatures that were pursuing them. They disappeared in the chaos, leaving Arcade, Prophet, and Dozer to retreat into the alleyways. They ran in the direction of the courtyard, hoping to find some form of sanctuary in the waiting arms of Liz, Widow, and the others. Little did they know what would be waiting for them when they arrived. Liz kept her sights trained on the tree line to the northeast, awaiting the arrival of whoever it was that Widow had seen heading their way. The fact that Widow confirmed without a doubt that it wasn't anyone from their group made Liz all the more nervous. Lar Ren sat next to her, both of them watching from a window inside a hut. Niels and Eckerd were doing the same from the hut next door. Liz had never seen the two Olgecs in a combat situation, so she felt a natural skepticism at their competency if things were to get too heated. But she welcomed the chance for them to surprise her. They were seasoned travelers after all, visiting exotic locations across the galaxy. They certainly weren't pushovers, and the walled-off courtyard wasn't far in case they needed to fall back, though she seriously doubted it would come to that. Before long, an oddly shaped figure could be seen moving around in the brush. Liz, recalling Prophet's warning, kept her weapon trained on it as best she could. It was already proving to be a slippery bastard with the way it was weaving through the forest with ease. Its movements were incredibly alarming. This thing wasn't trying to stay out of sight, rather it was like it was putting on a little show for them. It was impossible to miss, the shadowy figure proving to be a stark contrast to the forest behind it. And its form was an impossibly dark shade of gray, the edges of its figure distinct and easy to make out, the exact opposite of camouflage. Did it know they were watching? Could that explain its odd behavior? Or did it make more sense that it was completely unaware of them? Meanwhile, Niels and Eckerd were of a similar mindset, quietly wondering what it was they were looking at. The rancid taste of spores hung in the air. The hut they had taken up position in was full of small fungal sacs that popped the moment they got too close. Olgecs were built hardier than most species, so their natural reaction was to shrug it off as harmless. And given that they faced zero repercussions in the few minutes they spent within that hut, they were feeling pretty vindicated right about now. Oh, how foolish they must have felt when they realized. The figure finally emerged from the forest, its unusual form hunched over and twitching slightly. Its shape was eerily humanoid, but not in any typical manner. Its limbs were elongated far more than any known species, and they were razor sharp, like a pair of blades ready to hack away at anything that wandered too close. What words could be used to describe the feelings this thing evoked? Unsettling, disturbing, sickening? They all seemed to fit, but at the same time they failed to truly convey the full impact this thing had on the group. One might say that terror was the appropriate word, but that would be far too hasty. For you see, the terror would not come until later. For now, what they felt was simply fear. Fear that escalated the moment several loud pops echoed from the western edge of the village. A surprising turn that pulled everyone's attention away from the unidentified creature for only a moment. As if responding to the noises, the creature at the tree line released a loud, bellowing roar that echoed across the entire village and rattled their thoughts. The trap had been sprung, and they were none the wiser until Widow saw movement in the tree line. It was as if the entire forest had just come to life. An untold number of similar creatures charged out into the open from all sides, though these ones were not the same color. They blended in with the environment far more seamlessly. Was this an ambush? Was the first creature just a distraction, allowing the others to get closer? Widow tried to make sense of the formation in her mind. If she had to make a comparison, it would be as if the two huts, the ones containing her companions, were lifeboats in the eye of a storm, and the incoming hordes were monstrous waves crashing in from all directions, threatening to engulf them in a relentless surge. A pincer maneuver of sorts, though an unorthodox one at that. While Liz and the others were distracted by the creature standing at the tree line, the rest of the creatures had been setting up a U-shaped formation on their flank, prepared to strike when the opportunity presented itself. Widow, in a panic, reached for her Vic and tried to warn her people of the incoming assault. But all she could muster was a nonsensical "behind" over and over again. Viking took matters into his own hands and fired on the single creature standing at the tree line. A round tore through its chest and blew chunks out of its body. The creature screeched out in pain as its eyes shot up towards its attacker. It was met with yet another round through its head, its thick skull cap shattering into several pieces. The creature merely stumbled a bit from the injury, its durability frustratingly deceptive. Viking audibly grunted in annoyance as it recovered from the attack. He simply began firing at the creature relentlessly, shattering its notably fragile limbs. Its body was torn to shreds, Viking's assault unrelenting until there was hardly anything left. And then the waves came crashing in, hard and fast, brutal and devastating. Widow opened fire on the incoming hordes, but nothing could have stopped those creatures from reaching their destination, which just so happened to be the hut where the two Olgeks were currently holed up in. For some reason, they completely ignored Liz and Larren. But now wasn't the time to care about the why of things. They needed to react. Fast. In the hut below, Niels and Eckerd heard the crash from their position on the second floor. They reacted quickly by closing the door to the room they were in, but that would only buy them a few seconds if they were lucky. They needed to barricade themselves in, but all of the furniture was used to make funnels and choke points around the area outside. There was nothing left to fortify the room. So what were their options? They could try to hold their ground, hoping they could cut down enough attackers before running out of ammo or before being overrun. Maybe, if they piled enough bodies in the halls, they could create makeshift barricades from the dead. It would make for a hell of a story if they actually pulled it off, but they knew better than to stake their lives on a plan that relied so heavily on luck. That left them with option 2, the window. Niels sprinted toward it while Eckerd braced the door. He yanked at the latch, shoving against the thick pane of glass that stood between them and escape. He surveyed the distance of the drop and determined it was within acceptable parameters, which was just a fancy way of saying the worst he could do was twist his ankle if he landed awkwardly. Behind him, he could already hear the creatures attempting to break down the door to their room. They were bashing and clawing at the door, slowly chipping away at it. Eckerd didn't dare fire through it, fearing he would only weaken it further and make it easier for the creatures to reach them. There was no time for hesitation. Niels crawled onto the windowsill, preparing to drop onto the ground below. He slowly slid from the edge, making sure to carefully maneuver his body in such a way that guaranteed more control during his fall. A second later, his feet made contact with the ground, sending a shooting pain through his ankles. It was unpleasant, but thankfully, it also wasn't serious. The pain subsided rather quickly. He turned around and called up to Eckerd, urging him to get out quickly. Eckerd was busy pressing up against the door, hoping against all odds that he was actually doing something to keep them from breaking the door down. But of course, when Niels called out to him, he didn't hesitate. He hightailed it towards the window and, probably due to pure coincidence, the door shattered to pieces behind him, causing the creatures to pour into the room. Not having the time to finesse his way out like his brother, Eckerd instead leapt out of the window with all the grace of a fish on the riverbank. He hit the ground with a painful thud, which was followed instantly by a cry of agony as he felt his ankle give way beneath him. Eckerd slammed his fist into the dirt, both to distract from the searing pain and to exert his frustration at making such a monumental mistake in a dangerous situation like this. What a fool indeed. He shouldn't have tried landing on his feet, not when his dismount had been so erratic. It would have served him better to break an arm or dislocate a shoulder. At least his feet would have still worked. Instead, he was writhing on the ground in a pathetic and vulnerable display that no doubt excited his pursuers. He wouldn't be in that state for long, though. Niels wrapped his arms around his brother and forced him to his feet. The pain in Eckerd's ankle shot through his whole body, and he fell against his brother, nearly crushing him like a boulder. Niels just barely stopped himself from falling and kept his grip firm on Eckard. He dragged his brother forward with no real destination in mind. Progress would be slow going, so they needed to make a move now, lest they fall prey to the creatures on their tails. Their progress was frustratingly slow. Eckard did his best to hobble forward with as much speed as he could muster, but they were still moving at a snail's pace in comparison to the creatures. It seemed that most of them had turned around to get back outside the house, but a couple of them had made the decision to jump from the window as well. Widow and Viking were still raining fire on the creatures from their vantage point, trying to thin out the horde as much as they could, but there were too many. They could barely make a dent in their numbers. The creatures came in waves, pressing harder with each passing moment. The forest seemed alive with their sinister intent, and the sound of their chattering, gurgling voices filled the air. Liz and Lauren had made a beeline for the exit of their own hut, hoping to take some of the heat off of the brothers. They were greeted with the sight of the creatures single-mindedly pursuing the Olgecs, seemingly paying no mind to Liz and Lar. The two of them raised their weapons and began firing on the horde, praying they could kite some of them away from their allies. Shots rang through the air and limbs shattered with a sickening squelch, the combination of sounds already starting to become repetitive. To their surprise, it actually seemed to work. Several clusters of the horde tore off from the main group and changed direction toward their newest attackers, breaking off in a separate stream like a river bifurcation. It was so sudden that it took several seconds for the two of them to even register that they actually accomplished what they set out to do. And they had never regretted success so much in all their lives. They fired a few more shots before turning tail and retreating from the incoming tsunami. It was a horror fest unlike anything they had ever seen. Nightmares made manifest in reality. To be chased by such persistent creatures with obvious murderous intent, their blade-like appendages making silent promises to them should they be caught, slashing, slicing, gutting, and goring all in their wake. They may not have been durable, but their numbers more than made up for that little weakness. Chaos had truly unfolded in the not-so-abandoned village of Armillaria. The expedition team was split every which way across the village, and the assault by the creatures was executed to near perfection. History was very close to being repeated in this place. Niels and Eckard hobbled their way into the shadow of a towering wall blocking off the courtyard at the center of the village. Niels shoved his brother through the open gate and slammed it shut behind them. He immediately grabbed Eckard and hauled him towards one of the half walls. Eckard grunted in pain as he fell against the wall and used it as a crutch. Niels ripped Eckard's rifle off his back and handed it to him.
Can you still shoot?
Eckard grunted once more while composing himself.
I'll be fine. I just won't be able to run if they get close.
Then don't let them get close.
Niels patted Eckard's shoulder before taking position further along the larger part of the wall, using a bench as a platform to peek over. And not a moment too soon, as the horde stampeded towards them. Their gunfire echoed across the village, each shot adding to the growing symphony of chaos in their microbial speck of the universe. Liz and Lar retreated towards one of their funnels on the northern edge of the village. They squeezed through stacks of bookcases and dressers, the sounds of powerful gallops behind them urging them to double their efforts. Once on the other side, they faced back toward the funnel and trained their weapons on the gap. Before long, the creatures bolted into the small opening, crashing into each other and clogging the funnel. Liz and Lar opened fire, jamming it even further with their corpses. The creatures growled and shrieked in frustration as the resistance against their entry only grew in strength with each new corpse added to the pile. Several of them began climbing over the funnel rather than going through. Liz switched her focus on the ones going over as Lar stayed fixed on the ones trying to push through. Unfortunately, the strategy of going over seemed to have some staying power as more and more began clawing their way on top of the debris pile. Lar was forced to join Liz in pruning the unwanted growth, as the ones trying to push their way through the gap weren't exactly making the best headway. It wasn't long before the position was starting to look like a lost cause. The sheer number of creatures was far too overwhelming for two people to handle alone. The duo was slowly edging their way backwards as they continued to fire. trying to thin out their numbers as much as possible before being forced into another full-blown retreat. The retreat never came, though, for it was at that moment that several shots were fired from the forest, killing off the creatures faster than they could advance. Liz took a peek over her shoulder to see her husband emerging from the tree line, followed shortly by the rest of his group that had disappeared. An overwhelming sense of relief flooded through her as she turned back towards the charging creatures, her confidence now soaring with the combined might of everyone's firepower. They dispatched what was left of this wave with relative ease, a welcome reprieve from the frenzied storm they had just run from. Even after the last creature fell, everyone kept their weapons trained on the debris, just waiting for the dismembered bodies to gain a second wind and try to attack once again. But it never happened. The adrenaline of the moment slowly died down as everyone's senses started to sober. Liz turned around and locked eyes with Sam. She stared at him for only a moment before closing the distance and embracing him in a short but purposeful hug, the sight seeming almost out of place for the two veterans. To an outsider looking in, their relationship had a clear warmth, though they made an effort to not broadcast it. To witness a moment of affection between them like this was a rare sight indeed. Sam pulled away first.
When I heard the shots, I feared the worst.
Yeah? Imagine how I felt when we saw someone coming out of the woods that wasn't any of you, and we couldn't hail you on comms.
We're all fine, but what we found in that cave was, well, let's just say it changes things, and maybe not for the better.
What do you mean?
Before Lucas could respond, several shots echoed across the village, a sign that their comrades were still fighting for their lives.
Put it on hold for now. We need to help the others before they get torn apart by those things.
Lucas concurred with a quick nod.
Agreed. Did anyone breathe in any spores up here?
Liz tilted her head in confusion.
Not that I know of, why?
It's how they track their prey.
The artifact in Lena's hand suddenly lit up, and a voice spoke from it, shocking both Liz and Lar.
They wouldn't be so active if not for the spores. Someone among your group has caught the Vorlith's ire, and it has more than enough mycomorphs to subdue all of you.
Lar blinked a few times before speaking.
I'm sorry, but did the artifact just speak?
Lucas raised a hand to silence him.
I promise we'll explain later.
He turned to address the artifact.
So what do we do then?
You'll need to track down the Vorlith's local nucleus. It'll have sprouted out of the ground in order to connect to the mycomorphs in the village. If you can destroy it, you'll sever its control over them.
Okay, that doesn't sound so bad. How are we supposed to find it?
Trust me, it'll be hard to miss. Just look for a repulsive mound of flesh growing out of the ground, twitching and pulsating, filled to the brim with spores that it'll eject as a defense mechanism should something get too close.
Sam turned his gaze onto Liz, hoping that the description would sound familiar to her.
Why are you looking at me? We've been holed up near base camp this whole time. If there was a mound of flesh growing out of the ground nearby, you would have already known about it.
Sam sighed in frustration as he pulled up his Vic. Surely someone had to have seen something. This was bad. Really, really bad. Mason held the door shut for dear life as the creatures slashed away at the flimsy wooden barrier. Nova took aim out the building's front windows and fired on the creatures attempting to push their way in. This, of course, only baited the creatures into charging through the newly shattered windows as their point of entry. Leave it to Nova to make their adversaries' jobs easier. Nova's rifle suddenly jammed without warning, and Mason cursed under his breath when he noticed the grimy state of his companion's weapon. Of course, Nova's poor weapon maintenance would find a way to bite them in the ass like this. He pushed himself off the door with a frustrated growl to quickly ready his own weapon and fire on the creatures as they attempted to crawl inside. Luckily for them, the bodies started jamming up the window, forcing the creatures to pull their dead allies out of the way before they could enter. That bought them enough time to rush for the back door of the hut. They practically tripped over themselves trying to sprint back to the walled-off courtyard. During the whole ordeal, their comms crackled to life.
I need everyone to listen because I'm only going to say this once. These things are able to track you if you've breathed in any spores in the area. Even if you haven't, they'll still attack if they detect you. If any of you have stumbled across a pulsating flesh mound filled with spores, you need to let us know. Destroying that will stop these things.
Both Mason and Nova shared a look as Smoke's words washed over them. They stopped running and Mason wasted no time replying to his father.
Well, shit. Yeah, a few of us ran into that thing on the east side of the village. We all got hit with that spore shit.
Everyone except me.
Is there anyone close enough to deal with it?
Mason looked back and forth between the intersecting pathways, contemplating their options. Icarus's voice soon cut into the comms, sounding unnervingly panicked.
Yeah, that's a no-can-do from us. We're a little, oh, what's the word? Oh, yes, trapped inside a hut and surrounded on all sides by things that want to tear out our innards. It's looking rather dire here, so if someone could step up and save our arses within the next few minutes, it'd be greatly appreciated.
Dozer cut in next, his voice coming in short, breathless bursts.
We've got too many of those things on our tails. We're running for the courtyard. What about Mason and Nova? You guys still out there?
Yeah, we were heading back to base camp, but we're not that far from the fountain. We can make a detour and destroy it.
Smoke's voice cut back in with an irritated sigh.
Well, my expert just informed me that small arms fire might not do the trick. Burning it would be the best option.
Mason and Nova shared a look, both thinking the same thing. Icarus. Nova spoke into his Vic first.
Icarus, where are you?
Where you found the violin?
Tix interjected impatiently, the urgency unmistakable in his voice.
All right, sit tight, and I'll be there as soon as I can.
Mason raised an eyebrow.
Don't you mean we?
Nova shook his head.
Nope. I'm going alone, and you're going to base camp.
Excuse me?
The nearby wails of the creatures shook Mason of his indignance. Nova pointed in the direction of the noise.
You hear that? They're tracking you, not me.
Mason's face scrunched up in annoyance.
Oh, do not tell me you're trying to pull some hero shit right now.
Do you really believe it'll help the situation if we run up to their hut with your entire entourage in tow?
He shook his head.
It'll be better if you kite them to base camp while I sneak back to Icarus right under their noses.
Mason's shoulders sagged slightly.
All right, fine. I'll lead them out of here.
Nova gave him an appreciative nod before moving along the intersection away from Mason.
Hey, hold up!
Mason halted him before he could get far. Nova looked at him with a cocked eyebrow as he held out his rifle.
Trade me guns. Yours won't fire with all that shit inside of it.
Nova stared at him a moment before chuckling. The two of them swapped weapons, and Nova thanked him for it. Mason pointed a finger at Nova in response.
I swear to God, if you somehow fuck up my gun, I will hurt you.
Nova chuckled again before running along the path once more.
Don't worry, she won't get a scratch.
Mason only barely heard the response as he broke out into a full sprint back to base camp. The creatures weren't far behind, knowing exactly where he was at all times thanks to the spores. He wished things hadn't gotten so out of hand. Nova shouldn't have been handling this alone. It was reckless and ill-advised, but choosing to go with him would have been even more reckless. Maybe he should just be happy that at least one of them managed to avoid the spores earlier. Otherwise, they'd be even more screwed than they already were. Lena stared in horror at the sheer number of mycomorphs clawing at the walls of the courtyard, eager to tear apart the two Olgeks inside. What were the 8 of them supposed to do against a force that size? Start taking pot shots and hope for the best? As if on cue, a gunshot rang out from overhead. Lena turned to see Widow and Viking still firing from their sniping position. She corrected the number in her head from 8 to 10. 12 if she counted Niels and Eckerd. That number quickly shot up to 15 as Arcade, Amy, and Dozer came sprinting in from the east. So that was already most of the expedition team gathered in this one area, yet the odds were still overwhelmingly against them. Luckily for everyone, the mycomorphs hadn't breached the wall yet. Eckerd made sure to relay that he had potentially sprained his ankle during the initial chase and was therefore hindered in his ability to run or maneuver. That gave Sam and Lucas all the motivation they needed to try and take some of the pressure off of them. Unfortunately, no matter how hard they tried, they just couldn't pull any of the creatures off the walls. They were single-mindedly focused on breaching the courtyard, opting to completely ignore the easier targets sitting outside the walls. The spores must have had a profoundly strong effect on the mycomorphs for them to behave in such a manner. Regardless, they took it as a blessing. Everyone outside the courtyard was able to take pot shots at the creatures, while they desperately tried to tear down the walls. For a moment, it seemed as if their survival was all but guaranteed. But, as with all things regarding this expedition, it wasn't as simple as it seemed. A low rumble erupted from the forest, accompanied by earth-shaking thuds. A terrifying roar burst through the dense foliage, signaling the arrival of something that made the standard mycomorphs look like toddlers in comparison. A new wave of horrors had arrived from whatever hole they were hiding in, and in a wide variety of shapes and sizes to boot. The smaller ones revealed themselves first. They were more animalistic in appearance, and they ranged from quadrupedal to arachnid. Their faces were a horrifying fusion of animalistic features, their mouths filled with sharp, lacerating teeth and multiple glowing eyes scattered across their heads. Some of them were covered with large, spore-filled sacs that pulsed rhythmically, looking as if they were ready to burst at any moment. Looming close behind them came larger, slimy monstrosities with long, insect-like legs. Mouth-like openings gaped on their swollen carapaces, revealing putrid tentacles that writhed within, dripping with foul fluids. Walking into the clearing behind them was a more brutish humanoid variant. They stood at an impressive height, possibly 10 to 11 feet from the looks of it, and though their limbs were still elongated, they were far thicker than the standard mycomorphs they had faced up until this point. They moved at a much slower pace, slothfully lumbering their way toward the battlefield. Combine that with their expressionless and unmoving faces, and one might describe their attitude as unsettlingly lackadaisical, given the current situation. A renewed sense of panic spread through the group as they scrambled to turn their weapons on the mycomorph reinforcements. Chunks were torn from their bark-like bodies as the projectiles made contact with them, but still they marched on with the same level of determination as their physically weaker counterparts. The sense of dread only seemed to grow the closer they got to the wall. The more animalistic variants reached the barricade first, utilizing their larger frames and claws to tear at the wooden panels that made up the top half of the walls, slowly dismantling them one piece at a time. The bug-like ones kept their distance, waiting at the tree line for some unknown reason. And of course that left the brutes to lumber their way in from the rear. They tore the makeshift choke points apart with ease, grabbing handfuls of furniture like they were nothing and tossing them aside. It somehow felt like it happened in both an instant and an eternity, all at once. The defenses that Niels and Eckhard fought so desperately to hold had crumbled like wet paper beneath the might of these new variants. Lena felt herself staring helplessly as the walls were torn to pieces. She took aim at one of the brutes and pulled the trigger. Her plasma projectile tore a small chunk out of the beast's armor and left behind a small fire to boot, one that very slowly started spreading across the large creature's body. Much to Lena's surprise, the creature seemed to drop its apathetic tone, showing more emotion than she would have thought the brute capable. It roared out in agony as it grabbed a bookshelf off one of the barricades and hurled it in her direction with little effort. Lena's face fell further than it had all day, as she watched the rather large bookshelf soar through the air directly at her. For a moment, she was simply awestruck by what she was seeing. By the sheer strength of the mycomorph, combined with its ability to so accurately toss a piece of furniture so large right at her. How far away was it? About 150 feet, maybe? Frankly, it was simply flabbergasting. So much so that by the time her brain screamed, "Move!" it was already too late. She had just enough time to flinch before the shelf hit her head on, knocking the wind right out of her sails. She cried out in pain as the shelf's weight crushed her and pinned her to the ground. The force of the throw caused most of the shelf to break into pieces, causing it to explode into splinters that embedded themselves into Lena's face. She didn't exactly keep a list of the most painful experiences she's had in her life, but she felt confident that this one would rank pretty high. Her entire body had locked up from the pain, refusing to obey her commands. Stinging, burning, and throbbing sensations shot throughout her body, sending her mind into an array of panic as she wheezed with empty lungs. Her vision had become blurry, and she wondered if she would be fortunate enough to black out from the pain. Beth had seen the entire ordeal and felt her protective instincts kick into full throttle. She cried out Lena's name and rushed to her friend's aid. Lena was wheezing desperately for air with glazed-over eyes. Beth reached down and brushed a few strands of hair out of her face before interlocking Lena's hands with hers.
Hey, look at me,
she said in a shaky but still calming voice.
It's okay. Just breathe, okay? I'm right here.
She continued giving Lena words of comfort as her breathing began to slowly steady out. The gunshots and screeching in the background had been drowned out by Lena's desperate gasps for air. Her breathing returned to normal soon enough, and Beth breathed a sigh of relief. The moment was short-lived, however, as one of the bug-like mycomorphs charged towards them at an unexpectedly high speed. Beth barely had time to react before it was right on top of them, its long legs slamming into the dirt right next to them. Beth stared up at it in awe, wondering why it wasn't attacking. And that's when she noticed that it didn't have eyes. So why did it charge at them then? Was it following the sound of the bookshelf slamming against Lena, or perhaps the sound of her screams? Possibly, but it would be a pretty unlucky break for them if that were the case, considering how loud the chaos around them was in comparison. Her contemplation was interrupted when the creature began violently spasming above them, causing the bulbous sacs on its body to start popping and releasing spores into the air. Lena and Beth's eyes widened in horror, and they both quickly sucked in a gasp of air before holding their breaths. Panic set in as Beth realized just how much of Lena's body was still stuck underneath the bookshelf. She shuffled in her kneeling position, attempting to find a suitable grip on the bookshelf, but halted in place when the mycomorph started chittering. It twisted its body in her direction to reveal its mouth-like opening. Grotesque tendrils began to slither their way out like wriggling worms. Beth stared up at it, petrified by the disturbing sight before her. The tendrils seemed to feel around the area, possibly searching for the source of the noise. Beth stood stock still, out of fear of tipping the creature off to her presence, but they were still on a ticking clock. The spores floated around them, threatening to break their concealment the moment they could no longer hold their breaths. She met Lena's eyes and saw the same fear in them. And for the first time in forever, Beth didn't have any reassurance to give her. She needed to take action, to do something, anything. But her mind went as still as her body. Across the courtyard from the eastern side of the village, Mason finally arrived to see the chaos unfolding before him. He watched as the new creature variants funneled into the courtyard from the breach in the wall, and even more began pouring in from the forest. He somehow managed to sum up his entire mental state in just one word.
Fuck.
He heard the screeching of his pursuers not far behind and decided he needed to get a quick lay of the land before jumping into action. He scanned the horizon, trying to figure out what the best move was considering the current predicament. He heard gunshots ringing out from the courtyard, but couldn't actually see who was firing. There were more shots fired from the north, and he turned his head to see Lar, Lucas, and his parents rushing towards the courtyard from their side of the village. His eyes only traveled a bit further before landing on Beth sitting stock still underneath one of the new variants. And after a moment, he noticed Lena's form as well, crushed underneath a bookcase. The gears began to turn in Mason's head as he saw the thick layer of spores surrounding them. They were both in trouble, and no one had appeared to notice amidst the absolute hellish situation. Beth seemed to notice him out of her periphery and turned towards him with a desperate, pleading look. Mason stared at her silently as a flash transformed her face into that of a young man, reaching out to him helplessly as he's whisked out into the cold, deadly vacuum of space. The broken oxygen hose on his suit flops about uselessly as he gasps for air, drifting further and further away. Mason blinked himself back to the present, looking into the desperate eyes of the woman across the village. He took a deep, determined breath and holstered Nova's rifle, opting for his sidearm instead. They were relying on him, and he wasn't going to fuck this up again. Not like last time. He charged towards them without a second thought, the adrenaline in his veins increasing with each determined step. He raised his weapon and fired several wild shots, more concerned with getting the creature's attention than with accuracy. And of course, he had to throw in a few verbal taunts as well. The creature halted its incessant chittering and, like the flip of a switch, charged at Mason with unexpected speed. The spore fiend leapt through the air in a display that managed to awe Mason enough that he almost didn't dodge out of the way of its attack. Luckily for him, he shifted at the last second to avoid its pounce. Unfortunately, it seemed the creature was actually accounting for that, as tendrils squirmed out of its mouth-like opening and wrapped themselves around Mason's wrists, neck, and legs. He tripped over the mess of tendrils and flopped about like a fish as they pulled him back towards the creature's mouth. Mason struggled against them as best he could until he was pulled inside and completely enveloped. He watched helplessly as the mouth closed, casting him in total darkness. Meanwhile, Beth had managed to pull the bookshelf off of Lena before the two of them watched in horror as Mason was swallowed whole. Once the mycomorph had consumed its prey, it made a quick turn and leapt for the forest. And that's when it clicked. Mason was still alive and was being taken back to the Vorlith's lair to be transformed into another mycomorph. She refused to let that happen. He had just saved their lives. Now they had a duty to save his. Lena scrambled for her plasma rifle, which had landed a few feet away after the bookshelf incident. She winced at a sharp pain in her ribs, almost forgetting about the spores that still surrounded her and Beth. Luckily, Beth was on the ball when it came to dragging her away, where she could finally take a glorious gasp of fresh air. But she couldn't allow herself to get lost in the euphoric relief. Mason was still trapped in that creature's clutches. She raised her rifle, much to Beth's surprise, and fired at the mycomorph. Her first shot went wide, causing her to panic and fire a second one that was even more off the mark. She growled in frustration as her heart rate began to elevate. She took a second to actually line up her target this time and fired once more. Another miss. The shot went wide once again, and she cried out in frustration. What was she doing wrong? It was a big target, but she still couldn't hit it. Sure, it was on the move, but... Suddenly, her shooting competition with Mason replayed in her head, and Mason's words echoed in her ears.
Slower muzzle velocity.
She came back to reality and did her best to center herself. She took a deep breath and took aim once more. The mycomorph had nearly reached the tree line, meaning this was her last chance. This time she made sure to lead her shot, aiming not where the creature was, but where it would be. She released her breath as she squeezed the trigger, and time slowed to a crawl. Her weapon fired, and the plasma projectile launched forward. Across the battlefield, the creature was nearly home free as it reached the tree line. It prepared to pounce one last time into the thick brush, but before it could, the plasma tore through one of its legs, causing it to stumble onto the ground. Then came another shot, directly into its mushroom-like body. Small flames danced around the point of impact. The mycomorph began to flail about, desperate to pass the tree line and enter the safety of the forest. But Lena's assault was relentless. She followed up each one of her shots with another, tearing holes across the creature's body. Several shots still went wide, but it mattered little. Enough of them hit to immobilize the creature permanently. As the last plasma shot tore into the mycomorph's bulbous body, its spasms grew weaker, the tendrils loosening their grip on Mason as the creature fell to the ground in a smoking heap. Lena gasped for breath, her hands trembling as she lowered her rifle. Beth stared at her a moment, feeling guilty at the fact that she didn't even help take down the mycomorph. But in her defense, she was rather taken aback by the whole ordeal, up to and including the part where Lena wordlessly started shooting at it.
Holy shit, Lena.
Lena ignored her and made a desperate tug at Beth's arm.
Come on! He breathed in the spores. We need to get him out of there before the mycomorphs start swarming him.
It took a moment for Beth to actually absorb the information, but once she did, she wasted no time pulling Lena to her feet. Lena winced from the pain, but forced herself to move. They dashed toward the felled creature, its body twitching as the remnants of life drained from it. As they reached the creature, Beth didn't hesitate. She dropped Lena and grasped at the creature's rubbery flesh, attempting to pry open its mouth. Lena dropped to her knees next to her and helped, using the butt of her rifle to force the opening wider. For a moment, there was only the sickening squelch of tearing flesh and the acrid smell of the alien innards of the creature. Then, finally, they saw him. Mason lay within the cavity, covered in slime, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. His eyes fluttered open, disoriented, as Beth reached in and pulled him out with Lena's help.
We've got you,
Lena whispered, relief flooding her voice. Mason coughed violently, spitting out the bile-like fluid he had swallowed, but managed to grin weakly at the two women.
If you think this somehow makes plasma weapons superior, you can kindly fuck off,
he croaked as he struggled to sit up.
Shut up, Mason,
Lena muttered with a chuckle, unable to suppress a smile despite the chaos around them. Mason stared at the smoking corpse of the mycomorph, and his face suddenly dropped in realization.
Hold on a second. Did you shoot that thing's...
He gestured towards the main part of its body, where he had been tucked away during the creature's attempted escape.
Thorax? I think thorax is the right word. Whatever, you realize your shot could have penetrated and hit me, right?
Lena suddenly looked flustered.
Well, it didn't, so...
Maybe we should focus on the positives.
Lena shook her head, barely containing her nervous laughter as the weight of the entire situation started to sink in. They'd managed to save Mason, but the rest of the team was still fighting for survival. The courtyard was a chaotic war zone. Gunfire, screeches, and the roaring of more creatures as they poured in from the breach. Niels and Eckert had already lost any hope of keeping the creatures at bay. They heard the gunshots of their companions getting closer, but it mattered little as they stared down the brutes that had torn apart the barricade. The brothers opened fire on them, but the towering behemoths seemed to shrug off the assault as if it were a mild irritation. It didn't take long for them to reach the immobile Eckert and slam a fist into his skull. The attack knocked Eckert off his feet and slammed him into the wall with a sickening crunch. The force was enough to break the wooden fence and pin Eckert underneath the rubble. Niels watched in horror as his brother was flung like a rag doll. He saw that a crack had formed on the side of Eckart's head where he impacted with the wall. Time stood still in that moment as Niels watched the creatures start to surround them. Small ones, large ones, fast, slow, strong. They were all here. The same brute that had thrown Eckert into the wall stepped towards the pinned Olgek with the intention of finishing the job. What was Niels meant to do in that moment? Watch helplessly as his brother was crushed under the weight of this monster? Run away and save himself? Fruitlessly attempt to kill the beast before it delivered the final blow? In the end, he didn't really have a good answer. He just acted on instinct, not knowing if his next actions would save his brother or doom him. He jumped on top of Eckert, using his body as a shield from the impact. He didn't even have time to register that the creature had hit him. His head jolted involuntarily as his vision began to blur, and for a moment he felt his thoughts start to scramble. And he couldn't move his limbs. Why couldn't he move his limbs? Eckart stared at him, utterly petrified. Blood leaked from the back of Niels's skull onto his brother's face, and for a moment, the two of them made eye contact. Niels's eyes were bloodshot and wide open. He had a dazed look on his face, no doubt from the severe brain damage he had just received from the monster's deadly attack. But then another moment passed, and Niels smiled at his brother. A sad smile of reassurance, one that tried to tell him that it would be okay. A sickening symphony filled the air as the smaller creatures began to tear at Niels's helpless form with their razor-sharp claws and appendages. They ripped into his armored carapace and started slicing into the soft flesh beneath, treating his body like it was just another barrier in their way to get to Eckert. Niels's smile fell as his jaw went slack and blood poured out of his lifeless mouth. Eckert whimpered at the sight. His body shook uncontrollably as tears began to form in his eyes. This is how he would die. Trapped underneath the fresh corpse of his brother, forced to wait in agony as these monsters dug their way to him and would eventually tear him to pieces. Nova's boots thudded against the cobblestones, the weight of Mason's rifle a welcome reassurance in his hands. He moved with practiced precision, every step carefully calculated to avoid drawing attention. The sounds of screeching monsters and gunfire faded behind him as he distanced himself from Mason's chaotic retreat. The plan was simple. Nova gets to Icarus, Icarus passes on the incendiary grenades, then Nova uses them to destroy the mound. Too bad simple never worked out the way it was supposed to, not in a situation like this. Nova was acutely aware of the odds. They were bad. Approaching the familiar hut where Icarus, Tix, and Stogrel had holed up, Nova could hear the frantic banging and shouting from inside. He slowed his pace, ducking behind a broken cart to catch his breath. His eyes scanned the area, ensuring no creatures had spotted him. The hut looked battered, but still intact, though it wouldn't hold for long under the pressure of the attacking monsters. He activated his comms.
Icarus, I'm here.
Oh, that's splendid news. You've arrived just in time to witness our gruesome demise.
Nova smirked at Icarus's sarcasm, despite the dire situation. He couldn't help but appreciate the Breg's dry humor, even if they were on the verge of being overrun. He glanced around quickly, scanning for any creatures that might have caught his scent. The area was relatively clear for now, but the pounding on the hut's walls and the occasional snarls were a clear reminder that time wasn't on their side. He moved swiftly but silently from his hiding spot, circling around the creatures and positioning himself in a blind spot behind a pile of debris. From here, he could get a better view of the situation. At least a dozen creatures were clustered around the hut. Most of them were small and fast, but two larger brutes loomed over the others, their grotesque forms shifting as they smashed against the door.
I'm about to run by. You ready to toss me those incendiaries?
Ready as I'll ever be, just don't drop them.
Nova took a deep breath and psyched himself up for the run towards the hut. He broke out into a full sprint, straight at the horde of creatures pounding away at the building. The creatures ignored him at first, clearly more interested in his spore-infested companions. But that quickly changed as he ran by the window and called out to Icarus. A satchel flew out the window, and Nova caught it mid-sprint. He put its strap over his shoulder and readied Mason's rifle. The first burst of gunfire tore through the back of one of the smaller creatures, sending it crumpling to the ground. The rest of the pack turned instantly, their glowing eyes locking onto him with terrifying focus. He wasn't normally the type to rush into a fight, but right now he had no choice. He wanted to take some of the pressure off of his companions. One of the larger creatures roared, the sound echoing through the village like a battle cry. Nova didn't wait for them to close the distance. He sprinted away from the hut, leading the pack down the paved pathway towards the fountain. His heart raced as he heard their footsteps pounding behind him, the snarls growing louder with every second. Reaching into the satchel, he pulled out a glowing orange cylinder. He pressed the button on top, and the volatile compound inside flared to life, blazing hot in his hand. He finally slid to a stop, prepared to hurl the grenade at the fungal mass that sat only a few meters away now. The mass almost seemed to quiver at his arrival, like it knew what he was here to do. And perhaps it did, for in that moment, the foundation of the fountain started to crack as fungal tendrils began to squirm their way out. A low rumble from beneath the earth slowly built in intensity until the entire ground began to quake beneath his feet. The cracks widened, and the pulsing mound he'd assumed was the core of the mass began to shift. It shuddered, then, with an unsettling organic groan, started to rise. Not on its own, though. A massive fungal stalk shot up from beneath the earth, hoisting the mound into the air like the cap of an immense mushroom. Nova stumbled back, the incendiary grenade still glowing hot in his hand, as the sheer scale of the fungal structure unfolded before him. The ground split apart, spewing clouds of spores and bits of debris as the towering stalk reached higher and higher, stretching toward the sky.
What the hell?
Nova muttered, eyes wide in disbelief. The fungal mass he had planned to destroy was merely the tip, the fruiting body of something much larger, something that had been lying dormant underground. Now it had been awakened, and the full terror of it loomed over the village. From the base of the towering stalk, thick tendrils began to slither outward like the roots of a tree. They opened up to reveal writhing spore sacs and cocoons, filled with more of the mangled creatures. Both popped at the same time, releasing spores and monsters alike. Nova coughed and sputtered as he breathed in the vile spores, wheezing at the burning sensation in his lungs. The newly birthed creatures took advantage of this and lunged at him. Nova barely had enough time to hold his arms up in a futile attempt to shield himself from the attack. Their razor-sharp appendages tore through his armor and shredded his forearms. He cried out in anguish as he fell to the ground, feeling a slash go across one of his legs. He desperately reached for Mason's rifle and began firing wildly, shattering the limbs of the creatures before him. All sense of rationale had escaped him as he desperately fought for his survival. When the rifle clicked empty, he swung it like a club, bashing at anything that got too close. He clawed his way back to his feet, inch by inch, but cried out as another blade-like appendage stabbed into his side, resulting in a hot pain ripping through him. A grim realization settled over him. He wasn't going to make it out of this, but he also wasn't going to die before doing what he came here to do. He bashed at the creature with the butt of Mason's rifle until its arm was torn off its body, its blade still painfully embedded in his side. He shoved the creature away and grabbed the primed incendiary grenade off the ground. The rest of the creatures were closing in, ready to finish off their wounded prey. His eyes locked onto the fungal mass, now swaying high above him like a grotesque beacon. There was no hesitation left in him. This was it. With all the strength he could muster, Nova hurled the grenade at the stalk. It soared through the air in a fiery arc and landed squarely at the base of the fungal mass. The grenade ignited with a deafening roar on impact, flames spreading rapidly across the towering stalk. The fire trailed downward, racing along the tendrils that had erupted from the earth. The fungal mass shrieked, an unnatural, bone-chilling sound as it began to burn. Bright orange flames engulfed the cap, consuming it in a hellish inferno. The creatures cried out in terror alongside their burning master, enraged by the actions of the wounded man before them. Not wanting to waste their final moments of life, they lunged at Nova, slashing and stabbing at him with claws and bladed appendages alike. They tore into his flesh, ripping apart muscle and bone. He fell to the ground helplessly as the monsters ripped into him. His vision blurred, his body growing weaker with every agonizing second. But through the pain, he saw the towering fungal stalk consumed by the fire, its cap collapsing in on itself, the spores sizzling into nothing. As the stalk burned, the creatures attacking him grew sluggish, their movements faltering. One by one, they fell limp, their bodies crumpling lifelessly on top of him as the power that animated them flickered out. Nova lay there staring up at the sky, his breath ragged as he coughed up blood. But despite the pain, despite the blurring edges of his vision and the creeping darkness, he felt a small, grim smile spread across his face. He did it, his heroic final act. Would it be enough to redeem him for his past sins? If some higher power was watching, would they accept this as his penance? Perhaps his soul was too deeply stained, beyond saving. But as long as Libertalia and her people survived, that was all that truly mattered. He heard rapid footsteps approaching him, and wasn't surprised at all when he saw the distorted figures of Tix and Stogrel hovering over him. Tix didn't need to be a doctor to know that Nova's trauma was severe. He was covered in deep bloody gouges and slashes across his body. His sharp, ragged breaths were the only indication of life. Icarus came up the path, and a grim look spread across his face when he saw the condition of Nova.
Steam in hell.
We need to get him to the medic.
Icarus gave him a pitying look.
Lad, I admire your determination, but look at him.
He gestured to Nova, who began coughing up more blood.
Trying to move him might do more harm than good.
He just saved our lives. We're not leaving him to bleed in the dirt.
Tix fired back as he reached down and grabbed one of Nova's arms, lifting the man up over his shoulders. Nova groaned in discomfort, but was in no condition to protest. Stogrel pulled up his Vic and opened comms to Prophet, quickly informing her of the situation. Her response crackled through the device, tense and urgent. She ordered them to meet her at the courtyard as soon as possible, her tone making it clear that something bad had happened on her end as well. It ended so abruptly. 1 second, the creatures were tearing through the debris and Niels's corpse to reach him, then the next, they were just as lifeless as Niels. Eckhard didn't move. His wide, unblinking eyes stayed fixed on his brother's face, still wet with the tears he'd tried to hold back. He waited, praying he'd wake up, that this was all just a nightmare. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. The expedition team would never have veered off course to chase after such an obvious trap. They were smarter than that. Lucas wouldn't have put their lives in danger so needlessly. He was more competent than that. And of course, they weren't attacked by monsters in the forest. What a ridiculous notion. No, he was still in his tent, caught in some strange sleep paralysis. He just needed to lie still and wait it out. Any moment now, he'd wake up. He stayed unmoving for who knows how long, even as Smoke and Liz appeared in his field of vision, calling his name. They hadn't seen him yet, hadn't realized what had happened to Niels. But Eckhard didn't respond. He just wanted the dream to end.
Wait it out. You'll wake up soon.
His faith remained unshaken, even as Smoke and Liz noticed him. They began moving towards him, but stopped in their tracks when they realized the bloody form of Niels was lying on top of him. He paid no mind to the way Liz's expression transformed into one of wide-eyed horror, or the way Smoke rushed to his side to check his condition.
Wait it out.
He refused to acknowledge the dejected droop of Smoke's shoulders, or the way his head fell in solemn resignation.
You'll wake up soon.
Smoke and Liz spoke, but their words sounded muffled, like they were coming from underwater. They carefully lifted Niels's body off him and began to pull him free from the debris. He flinched as the weight on him shifted, a flicker of horror breaking through as he realized he'd just reacted to real touch, real pressure. But that didn't mean anything. It was just him shifting his blankets around, right? Yes, that was it. No reason to be concerned. Surely he would wake up soon. His pulse elevated with each agonizing second that Smoke and Liz spent digging him out. The pressure had been fully alleviated before long, and he cursed himself for seeing through his own delusion so quickly. Smoke and Liz stared down at him, and Liz's apologetic look sent a dagger straight into his heart. His paralysis finally wore off as his body began to tremble violently. Liz reached out to place a steadying hand on his shoulder, but he shoved both her and Smoke away as he struggled to sit up. His gaze swept the courtyard until it locked onto Lucas. There was no sense of rationality left in Eckhard now. A raging fire burned in his eyes, and only retribution would quell the flames. Eckhard seethed at the pain in his ankle as he rose to his feet. Smoke attempted to offer him a shoulder, but Eckhard only pushed him away once more. He raised a trembling finger, pointing it straight at Lucas across the courtyard.
You...
Lucas turned, confusion crossing his face, until he noticed Niels's body on the ground beside Eckhard.
This is your fault. You were supposed to be looking out for us, keeping us on track. So why in the hell did you lead us to this place?
Lena, Beth, and Mason rounded the corner into the courtyard just in time to witness the scene. Silence fell as all eyes turned to Eckhard, his voice cracking with rage. Lena instinctively stepped back when she saw Niels lying motionless on the ground, feeling the weight of Eckhard's grief pressing down on her before her mind even finished working out what had happened. Lucas, still processing the sight of Niels's lifeless body, took a tentative step toward Eckhard.
Eckhard, I didn't know
Didn't
this.
Didn't know what?
Eckhard spat, his voice rising. His face was twisted with anguish, his finger trembling as he pointed at Lucas.
That bringing us here would get my brother killed? That your obsession with that damn signal would lead us straight into this nightmare? We told you not to go chasing after what felt like an obvious trap, but you wouldn't hear it.
He pointed to Niels's corpse.
Look at him. This is what your decision led to.
Eckhard started to limp towards Lucas, closing the distance between them with each passing second. Sam stayed in lockstep with him, trying to calm him down.
Eckhard, you're upset and you have every right to be, but pointing fingers isn't going to bring him back.
Eckhard didn't respond. He reached for the sidearm at his hip and pressed the barrel to Lucas's forehead, his grief boiling over into raw, unfiltered rage. Lucas didn't flinch, a hollow despondence settling over his face that Lena had never seen before. Sam quickly readied his own weapon, pressing the barrel against the newly formed crack in Eckerd's head.
Put the gun down.
The fury in Eckerd's glare was unhinged, almost animalistic.
Why? Why should he get to live when my brother was torn to pieces right in front of me?
I don't care how you try to rationalize it. If you don't put that gun down, I will personally send you straight to your brother so you can explain to him why his sacrifice was in vain.
Lucas held up a hand and gripped onto Sam's gun with a desperate plea.
Don't, he's right. This is on me. All of it is on me.
Sam shook his head.
He's not thinking straight.
Let him make his decision, Sam.
He released his grip on the weapon and looked back at the Olgek.
Eckard, listen to me. I failed him. I failed you. I failed everyone here. I know that. And nothing I ever do will make that pain go away. It's a weight that I'll carry for the rest of my life. But if that's not punishment enough, if you think executing me is the only way to make this right, if that's the only way you'll get closure, then do it.
He held out his arms, making himself as vulnerable as possible. Sam held firm, watching every little twitch in Eckerd's body language. Eckerd's gaze softened ever so slightly, though his voice was still thick with anger.
Was it worth it? Did you find the answers you were looking for?
Lucas hesitated for a moment, suffocated by the weight of his decisions.
It's everything we could have possibly hoped for. The purpose of the communion temples, and what the Frun-Sha planned to do with them.
We know that someone controls these creatures, a Parlin named Zalma. She's the real cause of your suffering here, not Lucas. If you're gonna kill anyone, kill her.
Eckerd's grip on his weapon loosened, his breathing slowing. He carefully lowered his gun while maintaining tense eye contact with Lucas.
You gonna try to stop me like you stopped Stogrel?
This is different. She may need to die.
Eckerd nodded.
Good.
His eyes traveled over to Niels with a solemn acceptance.
I'm gonna bury him. Don't follow me.
He started to limp towards his deceased brother when Sam spoke up.
I can carry him if you want me to.
I don't.
His response was definitive. Sam didn't argue with him, nor did he re-extend his offer to help when Eckard struggled to lift his brother off the ground. Whatever stubbornness he may have had before was now multiplied by his grief. It wouldn't be an easy thing to overcome. Once he was finally able to lift Niels into his arms, he turned to exit the courtyard. He passed Lena, Beth, and Mason without sparing them a glance. As he passed by, Lena couldn't tear her eyes away from Niels' bloodied face. Every detail was burned into her brain. The light was completely drained from his eyes. His usually expressive features were now frozen and still. His jaw was slack, and a giant crack had formed at the back of his armored skull, causing black liquid to leak out onto his brother's arm. She watched Eckard every step of the way until he was out of view of the courtyard. Her stomach started twisting and turning into knots, and her heart was racked with guilt. Was this her fault? Was Niels dead because of her?
Shit!
Amy's voice snapped Lena out of her daze. She burst through the courtyard gate, eyes wide with panic.
Does anyone know if there's a table or a bed in there I can use for triage?
Everyone froze for a beat, confusion rippling through the group. Sam was the first to shake it off.
Yeah, inside, right through that back door. Take a right. There's a bedroom at the end of the hall.
Amy nodded quickly.
Perfect, thanks. Can someone give me a hand with my med gear?
Mason frowned, tilting his head.
Why, what happened?
Stogrel just radioed. Nova got hit bad, swarmed by those creatures. Said he's losing a lot of blood and barely conscious.
Shit.
Mason's face went pale.
They're on their way?
Amy nodded, her expression grim.
Yeah, I need to get set up fast.
I'll help,
Sam said, already moving.
I'll meet him halfway.
Mason added, turning to leave.
I'll guide him straight to you. No time to waste.
Good idea. Thanks.
Amy shot him a brief, grateful look before motioning to Sam.
Come on, we've got work to do.
With that, she and Sam disappeared into the house, the tension hanging thick in the air. Everyone else was left in the courtyard to stew in the aftermath. Lucas made his way to an overturned bench and pushed it back upright. With a despondent sigh, he sat down and leaned forward onto his knees, clearly needing to digest all that had happened. Meanwhile, Lena and Beth hadn't moved an inch. Beth took a long look at the piles of dead mycomorphs in the courtyard and came to the conclusion that this wasn't the best place to decompress. It also wouldn't do Lena any good to see Nova in whatever injured state he was currently in. She grabbed onto Lena's shoulder and motioned with her head toward the breach.
Come on, let's go take a walk.
Lena refused to take her eyes off the ground. but she still gave a solemn nod in response to Beth's suggestion. She allowed Beth to guide her out of the courtyard and onto the cobblestone pathway, where the two of them walked in silence through the empty streets of Armillaria. Tix's lungs burned as he sprinted down the path to the courtyard. Nova's blood soaked into his feathers, the dark red blending seamlessly with his black plumage. Each step felt heavier, and Nova's limp form seemed to weigh him down more and more. He struggled to keep up with Stogrel and Icarus, but the sight of the courtyard cresting over the hill gave him a surge of energy, and there was Mason running to meet them. Mason skidded to a stop, his eyes wide with concern as he took in the sight of the bloodied man draped over Tix's shoulders.
How is he?
Not well. He's been in and out of consciousness.
Tix panted, not slowing his pace. Mason fell in step beside him, his expression tense.
Prophet's setting up triage inside the house.
His eyes flicked to Tix, noticing the strain in the Breg's movements.
I can carry him if you need me to.
Tix's grip tightened on Nova.
I can manage.
You sure?
Yes.
Mason nodded, his gaze shifting to Nova's blood-streaked face. Nova's eyes fluttered open, glassy and unfocused.
Mason,
he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. Mason forced a reassuring smile.
Easy, man. We're taking you to Prophet. You'll be all right.
Nova shook his head weakly, his hand twitching toward the rifle strapped to his back.
I couldn't keep my promise.
Huh?
Your gun got a few scratches.
Mason blinked, stunned for a moment before letting out a shaky laugh.
Jesus, Nova. I'll worry about the damn gun after we stop you from bleeding out.
Nova tried to chuckle, but it dissolved into a ragged cough that cut the conversation short. His eyes fluttered shut again, and Mason's expression darkened with worry. They reached the courtyard in what felt like seconds. Smoke was already there, ready to take Nova off Tix's shoulders. He and Mason carefully eased the wounded man down, and Tix finally sagged, his legs giving way as exhaustion overtook him. Smoke and Mason carried Nova inside, and Tix watched them go, his body trembling with fatigue. He thought about following, but his legs felt like lead, and the world around him seemed to blur at the edges. Icarus and Stogrel hovered over him, their concern evident. After a few suffocating seconds of silence, Icarus reached into his pack and pulled out a flask. He held it out to Tix, who glanced between the flask and Icarus's face before taking it. Unscrewing the cap, he took a small, cautious sip. The liquid burned its way down his throat, but the warmth was a welcome distraction. He handed the flask back to Icarus with a nod of thanks, letting out a slow, shaky breath as he tried to collect himself. The chaos of the past few minutes replayed in his mind, and he clenched his fists, the faint metallic scent of blood still lingering in the air. Lena and Beth continued their walk along the lonely cobblestone road.
I keep seeing his face. It's my fault that we're out here. I'm the one who had the dream. I'm the one who insisted we find the signal.
Beth gave her a sympathetic look.
We all agreed to come here, Lena. What happened to Niels isn't on you.
Lena shook her head, her eyes fixed on the ground as they walked.
But if I hadn't pushed so hard, maybe we wouldn't have ended up here.
Her voice cracked, and she took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The guilt weighed heavily on her, a suffocating presence that made it hard to think, hard to breathe.
It's like I dragged everyone else into my nightmare by opening my mouth, and now Nils is dead and Nova's hurt.
Beth grabbed her shoulder, stopping her in place.
None of that makes you responsible for everything that went wrong. There are always going to be factors we can't account for, remember?
Lena sniffed, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand.
No matter how good of a plan we have or how well we execute it.
Beth nodded, giving her a small, reassuring smile.
Could I interject?
Drennick's voice hummed from Lena's satchel. Lena jumped slightly, having forgotten about his presence. She reached into her satchel and pulled out the astral cage, cradling it in her hands.
Listen, I won't pretend to understand the specifics of your situation, and it's not my place to tell you what you did or didn't do wrong. I don't know who was communicating with you, or why they led you to me. But what I do know is that you saved me from a terrible fate and gave me the first true sense of hope I've had in a long, long time. I know my gratitude won't undo the tragedy you've suffered here, but hopefully it is at least a small comfort.
Lena nodded numbly, but doubt still gnawed at her insides. She absent-mindedly traced her fingers along the astral cage's intricate patterns.
Thank you, Drennick. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I'm glad we found you.
Me too, little sister. I wish it were under better circumstances.
Lena took a deep breath and nodded, slipping the astral cage back into her satchel before looking at Beth.
I want to talk to Eckhard.
Beth's hand remained firm on her shoulder.
You sure?
Lena nodded.
It'd make me feel better.
Beth searched Lena's face for a moment, then gave a small nod.
Okay, let's go find him.
They continued down the cobblestone path, the air still and heavy around them. The village was eerily silent, the aftermath of the recent chaos lingering in the atmosphere. They found Eckhard near the tree line just outside the village. He was using a trench shovel to dig a grave for Niels. Every thud of the shovel into the dirt was violent and filled with anger. He refused to acknowledge them as they approached. Niels's body sat close by, his arms folded over his chest in a respectful pose. Lena felt her guilt bubbling up again at the sight. She stared at Eckhard for a few brutal seconds as he continued his grief-filled violation on the dirt.
Eckhard?
Her voice caused him to freeze in place, his eyes still on the dirt beneath him.
Eckhard, I'm so sorry.
No, I don't want to hear it. You don't know what sorry looks like.
He emphasized his words with another violent stab into the dirt. Lena flinched at the sharpness of his words, her heart clenching painfully.
How can I help? What can I do to make this better?
Eckhard laughed bitterly, a harsh, joyless sound.
Better?
He shook his head and pointed at his dead brother.
You think you can make this better? Do you think you're the only one here that matters? Because you're the one who found the artifact, right? You're the one having strange dreams and visions that can completely alter our course. It's all one big, exciting adventure, and you get to be right at the center of it.
His eyes were blazing with untempered fury.
You're not feeling sorry for me or for him. You're feeling sorry for yourself.
Lena took a step back, the force of his words hitting her like a physical blow. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, but the words died in her throat. What could she say? That she hadn't meant for this to happen? That she had only wanted to help? None of that mattered now, not to him. Eckhard let out a shaky breath, his shoulders slumping as some of the fight seemed to drain out of him.
You know what you can do to make things better?
He turned his back to her.
You can leave me the fuck alone.
He then continued to dig, each movement slow and heavy. Lena stood frozen, her eyes locked on Eckhard's hunched form as he stabbed the shovel into the earth again and again. Each movement seemed to carry the weight of his grief and anger, and she felt utterly powerless in the face of it. She swallowed hard, her mouth dry as she glanced at Niels's body.
Come on, Lena.
Beth whispered, gently touching her arm.
Let's give him some space.
Lena hesitated, wanting to say something more, to find the right words that would somehow make a difference. But there were no words that could bridge the chasm between them right now. She nodded reluctantly and turned away, feeling Beth's hand on her back as they slowly returned to the village.
I wanted to help ease his pain if I could, but now he hates me.
The astral cage buzzed inside her satchel.
Don't take to heart words said in grief, Lena. Give him time.
Lena hesitantly nodded, but could feel a tightness in her chest that made it hard to breathe. The village loomed ahead, the houses battered and broken, shadows cast long and dark by the late afternoon sun. How fitting that it now looked more like a graveyard than a place where people had once lived. Tix and Stogrel found a seat on the exterior of the courtyard, wanting to get away from the rest of the group. Stogrel looked westward, his eyes lingering on the sun barely cresting the peak of the voiceless pinnacle.
You think he'll make it?
Tix glanced up at him before shrugging his shoulders.
You never know. He could get lucky.
Stogrel released a humorless laugh.
Yeah, luck. It runs our whole damn lives, doesn't it?
Tix hummed in agreement, letting the silence settle between them. After a moment, Stogrel tore his attention away from the mountain and fixed his gaze on Tix.
Mind if I ask you something personal?
Tix raised an eyebrow.
Go ahead. If fate provided you the chance to go back to your wife, would you take it? Or is it too late?
That was an interesting question. The answer was obvious, though, especially after the past few days. His mind went back to the fairgrounds when he met those two female Bregs. For a moment he had convinced himself that he wanted what they were offering him. A chance to forget what he had left behind. To indulge in pleasure that would numb the pain. But in the end, he couldn't do it. They'd been kind, showing him around the fairgrounds, making him feel wanted in a way he hadn't felt in years. Their offer had been tempting, but all he could think about was Evira. What kind of person would he be if he indulged in his desires before ever even trying to find her again? So he politely declined their offer and went home alone that night.
I've been thinking about her a lot lately. There's not much I wouldn't do to be with her again.
He sighed, the weight of the day pressing down on him.
Especially after today.
Stogrel nodded.
Well, what if I told you there's a way?
Tix frowned, his feathers ruffling slightly.
What do you mean?
Stogrel's face suddenly darkened, his tone low and serious.
Remember what Nova said. If we turn over that artifact to Morrig, we could live like royalty. 50 million credits apiece.
Tix needed a moment to digest that information. Was he being serious?
Don't tell me you haven't thought about it. Now's the perfect time. Those two girls have wandered away from the others, and the rest are too preoccupied being worried about whether or not Nova's gonna make it. We can get the jump on them. We don't have to hurt him if that'll ease your conscience.
Stogrel's continued rambling only propelled Tix's confusion to new heights.
What about that story with your brother and the boat?
Stogrel shook his head, barely suppressing a smirk.
I don't have a brother, and my parents didn't die when I was young. The sister part was true, but I don't actually know who killed her.
He shrugged.
Doesn't really matter anyway. 50 million credits is enough for me to forgive and forget.
Tix felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him. He stared at Stogrel, struggling to reconcile the person he thought he knew with the one now sitting beside him. The casual way he dismissed his own past, the hollow, calculating tone. He thought that Nova was the performer, the expert emotional manipulator, but Stogrel had been the one truly playing everyone this whole time.
You're serious?
Stogrel's eyes gleamed in the dying light.
Of course I am.
Tix felt a coldness settle in his stomach.
So what then? We sell out Libertalia just so we can be set for life? Don't try to take the high ground right now. You're just like me. We're born in the hole and all we know how to do is crawl over everyone else to get out.
He pointed accusingly at Tix.
Those were your words.
Tix felt a rush of anger and shame as Stogrel threw his own words back at him. The memory of that conversation stung like a fresh wound.
Come on. You really think you've got a better chance at seeing your wife again? You're wanted by every major faction in the galaxy, right?
He leaned forward, his expression frustratingly smug.
If you hand over the artifact to Morrig, you could buy your way into any part of the galaxy you want. Nobody would be able to touch you. You'll find your family, and all of you will start anew, living the life of your dreams.
Tix clenched his beak, Stogrel's words slicing through him like a blade. Each point hit hard, dredging up memories of a life that felt increasingly distant. His mind went to Evira and her idealism. She always foresaw a path forward for their people, an end to the pits, to the oligarchy, to the slave trade. He always thought she was being naive. At one point, she even suggested that they take the children and flee to committee space. How was he supposed to react to that? He was born a street urchin, then clawed his way through the pits and eventually earned everything he could have ever wanted. Citizenship, a wife, children. And best of all, he was a part of the cultural elite. They were rich. They were comfortable. They wanted for nothing. And he was supposed to just leave that all behind? For what? A clear conscience? Moral integrity? Moral integrity doesn't mean anything when you're starving on the streets. How could he go back to that life? It was bad enough when it was just him, but he wouldn't drag his family into that nightmare too. Staying with the Ligans was the right call. Stogrel nodded in approval at Tix's contemplative silence.
Now you're getting it. Sometimes you gotta make the hard choice to do what's right for yourself.
His eyes slowly shifted away from Tix and towards the tree line, where he could see Beth and Lena approaching.
The window's closing. We better act now if we want to...
Stogrel wheezed out his final breaths before collapsing into the dirt with a hole in his chest. Tix stood over him, the smoking barrel of his gun clear evidence of his quick and decisive act. His heart raced as he stared down at Stogrel's lifeless body, the invasive smell of gunpowder still wafting through the air. He hadn't planned for this. The choice had been forced upon him in an instant, a split-second reaction to Stogrel's insidious manipulation. Beth and Lena halted at the edge of the clearing, their eyes widening in shock as they took in the scene.
Tix?
Beth began as her hand went to her sidearm.
What did you do?
She demanded, her voice tense with confusion and fear. The courtyard stirred as others rushed out to investigate. They arrived just in time to see Tix calmly holstering his weapon, his claws raised in an open, non-threatening gesture.
He wanted to hand the artifact over to Morig for the reward.
What? You're lying. He wouldn't do that.
He lied, Icarus. He lied about everything. He didn't hate Morig. It was a ruse to keep us off his scent.
Oh, and he just so happened to tell you all of this while you were out of earshot of everyone else, eh? How convenient.
He was trying to entice me into helping him. 50 million apiece. That was his offer.
And that was enough to make you want to kill him?
He was about to make his move. He wanted me to help him take the artifact off of Lena and Beth while everyone else was distracted. When he gave me an opening, I took it.
The others began to gather around, their expressions a mix of shock, confusion, and a hint of fear. Tix could see the uncertainty in their eyes, and the tension hung thick in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. But he internally celebrated when Beth removed her hand from her sidearm.
I believe him. I made the mistake of questioning Tix's loyalty back on Etheria. I won't question it now. If he says he did what he had to, I trust him.
Tix nodded at Beth, grateful for her intervention, but it didn't completely curtail the group's worries. At least, not until Prophet came walking out of the house, her arms covered in blood. She waddled up to the group with a solemn expression on her face and a Vic in her hand.
Nova's dead.
Silence fell over the group once more. The news hit like a physical blow, the weight of it crashing down on everyone. The expedition team was now down to 17. Prophet's eyes went to Tix, still standing over the corpse of Stagrel. She didn't even acknowledge the dead Warrior. She simply walked up to him and held out the Vic.
He wanted you to have it.
Tix's face scrunched up in confusion.
Me?
Prophet's tired eyes pleaded with him to take it.
He said he trusted you with it. You're our new lifeline to the Frun-Sha mole.
Tix hesitated, his eyes darting between Prophet's bloodied hands and the Vic she held. The weight of the moment pressed down on him.
Why me?
He said he believed in your loyalty to Libertalia.
She glanced over at Stagrel's crumpled form.
I'm inclined to agree.
She gestured with the Vic in her hand. He stared at it for a few tentative seconds before hesitantly reaching out to grab it. Its weight felt surprisingly heavy in his palm. His eyes went back up to meet Prophet's, but she could only muster a half-hearted nod before turning away from him. The news of Nova's death was starting to sink in for everyone now. Dozer leaned against the courtyard's wall with a somber expression. Smoke crossed his arms and stared at the ground as Liz laid a comforting hand on his shoulder. Mason stared at his rifle, brushing his fingers against the shallow scratches marring its surface. Lucas returned to his bench in the courtyard and was now joined by Arcade and Laren, the three of them sitting in quiet mourning. Viking and Widow hovered on the edges of the group, having caught the tail end of what had just transpired, and Tix remained where he was, his clawed fingers tracing the edges of Nova's Vic. His mind churned, pulled back to the day he'd received the galaxy-wide alert, branding every Lygan a wanted criminal under the matriarch's orders. In a single moment, all that wealth, all that status, was gone. If he'd listened to Avira back then, if he'd let go of the luxuries he'd clung to so desperately, he might still have his family. He might still have his integrity. But he'd refused to let go. That refusal had cost him everything that mattered. Staring down at Stagrel's lifeless body, Tix vowed he wouldn't make the same mistake again. He wouldn't let himself, or anyone else, be consumed by the kind of temptations Stagrel had offered, even if it meant never seeing his family again. The sun slowly dipped behind the voiceless pinnacle, burying the village of Armillaria in its magnificent shadow. Today marked the expedition team's first true test against the horrors that threatened their home. And in spite of the tragedies that had befallen them, it was still, indeed, a victory. They had discovered Drennick, the creator of the artifact that started this journey. They learned of the artifact's purpose and how it was connected to the communion temples. They learned of Morag's ambition for immortality and Zalma's plan to wield absolute control over the temples. None of this had been the salvation they would have hoped for, but now that they were no longer flying blind, they could finally piece together a plan to protect their home. They would need time to discuss the details of what came next, of course. The discovery of Drennick suggested they would have to modify their plan slightly. If they wanted to stay in Drennick's good graces, then they would need to help him find a way to destroy the temples for good. But in all honesty, there was nothing stopping them from taking control of the temples themselves. As long as they held the astral cage, the option was on the table. But surely, protecting Libertalia was a pure enough motive to justify such an act. At least, that's what Lena had told herself. That line of thinking could very well lead them to an unnervingly dark place. It would serve them well to make sure they don't lose sight of who they are during this expedition. But the time for such worries would have to be dwelled upon later. For now, they would see to the burying of the dead. The group gathered at the tree line and stood around 3 freshly dug graves, 2 of which bore wooden headstones while one remained bare. Final words were spoken to honor the dead, detailing the bravery and sacrifice of Niels and Nova. The ceremony, if one could even call it that, was short. The final hour of daylight was upon them, and they had little desire to spend the night anywhere near this village. The events that transpired within Armillaria would soon be nothing more than a grim memory. Lena stood in the clearing and observed as one by one the group began walking away from the grave site to grab their gear for the trek ahead. Tix was the last one to part, taking a few tentative steps towards the graves. He knelt down and placed what appeared to be a violin case on one of the dirt mounds. He stood back up and stared for only a few moments before turning around and joining the rest of the group. Lena was oblivious to the meaning behind Tix's gesture, seeing it as a strange thing to leave them with. She turned to the others, watching as they prepared to leave. The expedition team was smaller now, each person feeling the loss of their companions in a different way, but united by the determination to protect their home. Eckhart had clearly taken it the hardest out of them all. He stood far away from the rest of the group, his eyes heavy with grief and his posture guarded. Lucas stood at the head of the group, his face lined with fatigue from the heavy weight of leadership. They followed him into the forest, and Armillaria faded into the darkness, its horrors and its sorrows left behind in the deepening night.